If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What is the scariest or most frightening paranormal or supernatural experience you've had while exploring haunted, rundown, or abandoned places?
Unknown guy by the stream. My cousin Jason and I were exploring a little wooded area when we were teens. We spent most of the day just walking and checking stuff out. When it started getting a little late around dusk, we were walking back the way we had come. We had to walk around this thick stand of trees and then across a tiny stream, which fed into the large creek where we were playing around. Jason nudges my arm all of a sudden and says, "Look." He pointed through the stand of trees. A boy was squatting by the little stream, which was probably 10 yards away. He was wearing a bright yellow shirt and blue jeans. There wasn't anything that odd at first, aside from the fact that we hadn't seen anybody else down there all day. He was just looking down with his hand resting on the mud in front of him. We continued around the stand of trees, and he was out of our sight for no more than 15 or 20 seconds. When we returned to the spot where he had been, he had vanished. He was nowhere to be found. It was muddy right where we had seen him sitting/squatting, and there were no footprints, handprints, or bike tracks in the mud, no tracks or marks at all. I and Jason looked at each other and ran home without stopping. We talked afterward about getting the same very bad feeling when we ran. But it's weird too, we were making a lot of noise walking through the woods breaking branches, and he didn't look up. Over the years since, I've been all over that area and haven't had anything else happen. Thanks for your time. A group of friends made the decision to visit an abandoned house, which had been the scene of a horrific murder-suicide years prior. It was in an abandoned, restricted area. We had to climb over a large fence to get in. The area inside the fence was nice. A bunch of homes, clean paved streets, but not a single person here. When we discovered the house, a small metal fence and gate surrounded it. So at this time I had no idea that this was anything other than a normal house. Like I didn't know the backstory or anything. I just thought it was a normal gated community. I kept thinking my friends were talking too loud and we were going to wake up the neighborhood. As they were all loudly chatting, I saw someone open the door of the house we were preparing to enter, look out at us, and then close the door. I remember telling them to shush because we were being rude. Anyways, after that we entered the gate and walked up to the door. The first two people couldn't get the door open, so we were about to leave, but I, and only I, heard the door unlock, and I tried the door, and it opened to everyone's surprise, and we entered. There was a staircase directly in front of the door, and when we started walking up the stairs, it was dark as hell, bats started flying around us, and we had to swat them away. Got upstairs, and there was a meal set up for a family sitting at the family table and chalk outlines on the floor. The food was old, though, like rotten, and there were cobwebs and dust everywhere. Untouched. We searched all around and didn't see anything else or anyone else. Knight's Ferry ghost. Later in the evening, at around 7:30 one night, a buddy and I were bored, and so we decided to go to Knight's Ferry, California. Knight's Ferry is an old preserved small town on a river for tourists to whitewater raft or explore the old bridge and brick buildings, which have bars on all the entrances and windows for obvious reasons. Since it was after dark, the small village was all ours to wander and explore as we pleased. We did this for about half an hour, our footsteps echoing off the looming dark old brick factories and stores. My buddy realized he forgot his phone in his truck and left me near the old bridge while he went to go check it or whatever. About 10 minutes later, just as I was beginning to question his whereabouts, he suddenly jogged up to me, his face pale. Through his huffing and puffing, he managed to get out that we had to leave because something had spooked the shit out of him. He waited to tell me until we were in his truck and on our way out of there. He told me that he had seen a shadow in the shape of a man with glowing yellow eyes standing in the doorway on the other side of the bars in one of the main buildings. He said that when he lit it up with his flashlight, he could see right through it. Naturally, I persuaded him to turn around so I could investigate. When we got back there, he strongly refused to get out of the truck, so I grabbed his flashlight and went alone back to the building to check it out. I thought I heard a couple of strange sounds, and I definitely got chills and an eerie feeling, but unfortunately, I didn't see anything. That abandoned amusement park in West Virginia that's straight up cursed. There's this place in West Virginia called Lake Shawnee Amusement Park, and it's got one of the creepiest backstories I've ever heard. Despite its abandonment since the 80s, people continue to discuss the eerie events that occur there. The land it sits on has a violent past. In 1785, Mitchell Clay, a settler, lost 3 of his children. 2 were ended by Native Americans, while the third was captured and set on fire. Clay and some others retaliated by killing several Native Americans. Indeed, the terrain was not conducive to peaceful construction. Fast forward to 1926, when somebody named Conley Snitto decided to open an amusement park there. It had all the usual stuff, a Ferris wheel, a swing ride, and even a swimming pool. But accidents started piling up. 2 kids drowned in the pool, and in 1966, a little girl died on the swing ride after a delivery truck backed into it. The park shut down in 1967 after failing a health inspection. In the 80s, a former employee named Gaylord White bought the land and tried to reopen the park. But after just 1 season, it closed again. Insurance costs were too high. Then things got even weirder. White's crew started digging for a new attraction and found Native American artifacts and human remains. Archaeologists eventually uncovered 13 skeletons, mostly kids. Now, people say the place is haunted. Visitors report hearing children's laughter when no one's around, and some have seen apparitions near the old rides. The swing ride where the girl died is still standing, rusted and motionless, but some swear they've seen it move on its own. Numerous ghost hunting shows have featured the park. They all say the same thing: there's something not right about that place. If you're into haunted spots, Lake Shawnee is open for guided tours during Halloween season. Just don't take anything from the site. People who've pocketed souvenirs have reported bad luck until they return them. What's the most eerie aspect? Some say the spirits of those buried there never left. 3 friends go into a house that had previously caught fire to explore it. 2 of us heard someone calling us within the house. Hi everyone. This happened to me and my friends 3 years ago, but we were just talking about paranormal experiences at work today and it reminded me of this. So we had just graduated high school, and it was summer. We were driving around in my friend Heidi's car, bored as hell. Her house had caught fire 2 weeks prior. And man, I mean it really did. The whole house was charred. Since we were so bored, Heidi suggested we go explore her house. So we drive there. The outside didn't look too bad, but the inside looked charcoal black. We roamed around the first floor, and then my other friend Spencer and I decided to go upstairs. We stand in the hallway in between all the rooms, and then we both hear our names being called by a really deep voice. I speak for both of us when I say we got chills and jolted down the stairs. We run and tell Heidi, and she doesn't believe us. The crazy thing is that both Spencer and I heard our names being called. The fact we agree on that is wild. Heidi to this day thinks we're pranking her. Has anyone experienced anything like this? Banshee? So this happened when my brother and I were maybe 11 and 12. We lived in a rural town. The town had a unique blend of bustling streets and expansive farms at the time. My family home was the second last house in the last neighborhood before you hit farmland as far as the eye could see. To the right of my house was my neighbor, then a thick hedgerow, which separated the housing estate from the farm. The first 5 or 6 fields in this part of the farm grew barley and wheat. As kids, we made tunnels through the hedgerow and spent hours every day during the summer exploring the farm with friends. Each field was huge and was separated from the neighboring field by other large hedgerows, some complete with streams running through them. One night, my little brother, our 2 best friends, and I were outside our house playing football and skateboarding. It was about 9:30 at night and quite dark. Remember, we are the second last house on the road and the very last housing estate before it was just barely as far as the eye could see. We were essentially at the very edge of town. Anyway, on this night, we were hanging out as usual when suddenly we heard an ear-piercing squeal/screech coming from the barley field beside us. It was so loud and high-pitched that it took our attention in an instant. It had a feeling of panic about it, yet it was kind of funny to our young minds. We decided to go investigate, thinking it was a pig or an injured animal of some description. So, in our youthful excitement, we burrow through the hedgerow and start running towards the origin of the sound, all laughing in excitement. The barley was ready to be plucked from the earth, so it was high up past our waists, so we couldn't see anything that may be on the ground injured. As we get close to where the sound is coming from, it suddenly stops. We stop and look at each other laughing, then it starts again, but now it is originating from the point of the field that we first entered. We exchange glances in confusion before sprinting towards the sound, believing it must be a scared, injured animal. Then the sound stops before immediately starting again directly behind us. This time, it sounded ominous, and the feeling changed. The sound then stopped again, starting instantly but way off in the distance. It moved towards us at speeds way too fast for an animal. Just as it reached us, it stopped and again came from the totally different end of the field, hurtling towards us in pitch black. Now we are frightened. This is not an injured animal. We've no idea what it is. The sound seems to stop and start from all directions, moving at incredible speeds around us and covering huge distances in seconds. Without saying a word, we all run as fast as possible back to the hedgerow, which we entered. Throughout this time, a loud, screeching wail surrounds us. My younger brother begins crying in fear as we all rush to get back into our neighborhood under streetlights near our home. As soon as we cross the threshold, the high-pitched screaming chasing behind us stopped at the border. We were all physically shaken and scared now. My little brother was hysterical for weeks, refusing to go back into the field even during a sunny day. A few years later, my brother would tragically die suddenly in that house. Many strange sightings of a withered woman were reported around those fields over the years. If anyone is familiar with the legend of the banshee, please let me know what you think. This occurred in Ireland, as you've probably guessed. I encountered 2 eerie occurrences during the same night. My friends and I often ride around at night, exploring abandoned buildings and talking for hours. Tonight at 1 a.m., I pulled up to a red light and merged into the left lane beside another car. As I approached the line, I noticed a woman in the adjacent lane, bobbing her head to a strange, intermittent song. Her face seemed to distort, her face melting away, eyes rolled back, and mouth agape and stretching downward as she stared at me. The red light lingered for nearly 2 minutes, and I felt an instant chill, forcing me to pull over in a panic. Later, at a graveyard we sometimes visit, my friend and I witnessed a giant, skinny, black figure running on all fours, holding a bright light. If anyone has an explanation for any of this, please let me know. Because my town might just be haunted or something. When I was in college in Maine. It was my first year of college. It was Sandy Point, Maine. It is a tiny town close to Bucksport, Maine. I used to go visit my parents on the weekends because I stayed in the dorms at school. So a reference to where the house was. There was this creepy little motel on a hill on the other side of the road. You had to make a sharp right onto their road and then another sharp right into their driveway. The house was really old. It was colored yellow and had apple trees in the yard. First of all, let me say that Sandy Point was one of the creepiest towns I have ever been in. The feel was way off. It did not matter day or night, you never saw anyone. I used to go for walks at different times of the day, and I never ever saw anyone. I always found that odd. So did the house. You come up the steps into the house. You immediately enter the dining room. All the floors were very old wood floors. Straight ahead was the kitchen. To the right were the stairs going upstairs, and the living room, which was always freezing cold, was also to the right. The door to the dirt floor basement was in the kitchen. So my mom and I never liked going into the basement. Felt way off. It felt like someone was watching you the whole time. I never liked the living room, it did not feel right. The only person who seemed okay with it was my dad. Okay, let's get to the ghost. At night I would always put my clothes out for the next day all together in a chair in my room. When I would wake up the next day, they would be placed all over the house, so I had to look for everything. Would hear footsteps in the hallway at night. I would hear it come up the steps and then come down the hallway past my room towards my parents' room, then back towards, and then stop. I would usually say hello because I am a person who is usually up super late at night anyway. Then hear nothing, only to wake up in the morning to have to go on a treasure hunt for my clothes. My mom was always creeped out in that place. What sealed the deal with me about something going on came from my dad. This happened while I was at school during the week. He is someone who is very skeptical of the paranormal. He told me he stayed home one day because he was not feeling well. He had stayed in bed and woke to someone coming up the stairs outside. He heard the door open and someone walk in. Thinking it was my mom home from work, he called out. Nothing. He heard footsteps in the dining room. At this point he was out of bed. He called my mom's name again. Nothing. Just as he came to the top of the stairs, he saw a man walk into the living room. My dad is someone who does not mess around with anything like someone breaking and entering, so he got his gun from their bedroom and proceeded down the stairs, telling whoever was in there they had better leave or be shot. No one answered, so he did a sweep of the whole house. He looked everywhere. All the rooms, basement, outside, everything. There was just no one there. The man he only saw was in overalls and had on boots. He only saw the man's back as he entered the living room. They moved to Bangor soon after, which made me happy. I have other stories from there, but maybe another time. Well, that is my story, would love to hear yours, so please share. So I went on a drive with my dad today on the back roads past my hometown. We just wanted to explore the more rural areas surrounding, you know? We embark on this joyride, going about our business and enjoying ourselves, until we come across an eerie, extremely narrow, one-way gravel road in the middle of nowhere, devoid of any signs of life, except for the memorial of a man who crashed and died. So we drive through this creepy-ass area, midday, mind you, for about an hour going straight. Along this ride we find a bunch of rusted out, large, crumpled hunks of metal. We can't even make out what the duck these shapes even used to be. We also find random structures that we also can't figure out. It's like an unfinished area with no signs of life anywhere. Anyways, we turn around finally, driving this same narrow road where we haven't seen another car in an hour. And we make it back to the memorial site in 10 goddamn minutes. Driving slower than before. The kicker is that we find a bunch of furniture that wasn't there before, and there was no sign of anyone else. How the duck did we drive an hour's distance in 10 minutes going slower? The whole ride back was completely silent. My grown-ass dad was freaked the duck out too. Floating head in a mysterious old trailer. My father told me this story from his childhood very recently, and as a firm believer in ghosts, I decided I needed to do some research on it. If anyone knows any legends or stories that sound familiar to this, please give me your thoughts. For reference, my father, F, lived in a cabin on stilts, right next to a river in the mountains as a child. He was around 10 when this happened. The long driveway that led to his house, along with the other cabin that belonged to a family friend and was primarily used as a vacation home, had a sort of slope on one of the sides. It went down rather far, and trees filled the area. Where the land became flat, there sat an old trailer, one of the small ones. Part of the river was nearby it, which will later be important to the story. Keep in mind that no one in the family ever spoke about this trailer, and, as far as my father could remember, it was never even acknowledged. F and his cousin, C, would constantly explore places that most people would walk away from, even as young children. I've been told stories of them climbing down into caves with only a flashlight or just waltzing into abandoned cabins in the middle of the woods without a second thought. Yet, they never went down to that trailer. F said that they would often look down the hill to the trailer but never climbed down due to the intensely negative vibe the place gave off. One night, F and C were playing around outside around dusk. For some reason or another, they ended up at the top of the hill, looking down at the trailer. This time, though, it was different. Near the top of the trailer, there was a small window, a small little port window kind of thing. They saw a face looking back at them through the window and immediately booked it. They ran down the driveway back towards the cabin, panicked about what they had just seen. When F looked back, they saw a floating head chasing after them. F had a hard time describing the head, as it had been a long time since this event took place, but he kept reiterating that it had a strange kind of glow to it. The way he described it was if you look at a light bulb, it was like the aura around it. C had said that it seemed like a fireball. When they arrived back at the cabin's front porch, the head was no longer chasing them and was nowhere in sight. They chose not to inform their parents about the experience, reasoning that a story about a floating head chasing them might not be believed. Later, I believe a year or so later, but it could have been longer, a huge flood hit the area. The waters were so deep that the entire trailer would have been completely submerged. When the floodwaters receded, the trailer was gone, washed away with the water. No one in the family ever mentioned it or spoke about it, and no trace of it was ever seen again. My first real experience. So in July 2020 I visited an abandoned farmhouse near where I live. The place itself wasn't that scary until we entered the middle of the house. This part was completely dark. There was no natural light anywhere, so we turned on our torches. Things seemed to move. A chair would move a foot or so to the right, and the ladder in the front room would creak under the weight of a person, but there was no one there. We thought nothing of it because we didn't know the house was haunted until I shared my video online, where I had loads of fellow urbex explorers telling me the real history of the building. A father had ended his 2 young children and hidden the bodies in the basement, which, after his trial, had been sealed completely, and the mother hung herself in an upstairs bedroom. It is rumored that the mother haunts the upstairs of the house. Most say she is not violent, but she doesn't like people entering her room. In fact, her room is the only one that has decayed so badly that the floor has dipped into the front room. However, it was not her ghost we encountered the second time. Once I knew all of this, I went back. A foolish decision, but a decision nonetheless. This time I wanted to make contact. I hope to speak with the woman. Ask her what happened in that place. Why she can't move on, etc., and if she wanted to talk to us. For a while we walked around the house. We would hear things. A scuffle of feet, like that of a person too exhausted to properly pick their feet up, and slamming of doors upstairs, and the old basement door would move and creak. There was no draft. And so, before we lost courage, we opened up a speaking app. I wasn't sure how well it would work. What with it being a free app on the Play Store. But we began to politely talk to the ghost anyway. Every now and then my phone would click, the screen would go blank, and static would play loudly. I began to get spooked out. Then my cousin said, "What if a ghost tells us to get out?" And that's what happened. As soon as she finished speaking, a yes violently came through my phone. A chill ran through my whole body, all at once. It hadn't been the woman's voice. It was the angry, hostile voice of an older man. We screamed and raced out of the house so fast. Once outside, I had to take a moment because I felt as though I was going to throw up. We ended the session on my phone and left. The building is due to be demolished later this year after lying abandoned for over 30 or 40 years. And yet, since I spoke to the entity, I've had the same dream every night of a slightly different building. Nothing in my dream ever changed. Until last night. Someone had broken a window, and a dark, shadowy figure beckoned me forward. That's when I woke. I haven't felt quite right since going to that building, and I will never be going back. This probably happened a good 8 or 9 years ago, but maybe longer, I'm not sure. My grandmother lived about an hour and a half away from us. It was a small seaside town in the South Island of New Zealand. For a lot of my childhood, we'd go on holidays every weekend and take the drive to go and see her. Her property had 3 sections on it: the main house where she lived, a smaller cottage diagonally to her main house. The cottage was a former railway cottage, old, and another section connecting the two. This was a mostly empty section, mostly used for storing firewood and having rubbish burn-offs. She never really did anything much with it. However, on the corner of the property, there was this shed. It was a good size, probably around the length of 2 decent-sized SUVs and the width of 2 as well. It was shaped like a rectangle and built with wood. The town was old, and the shed was built well before my grandmother had ever moved into where she lived, though she had also been coming to the town for years. It was run down, the boards were weathered and creaky, and there was this lock on the door. It was always a place that us kids weren't allowed to go inside of, not for any supernatural reason, as none of us believe in that kind of thing. The place was just old, shabby, run down, and slowly crumbling, as all things do with time. One day I got curious. The lock was already rusted, and I knew I could loosen it. It was only me and my grandmother there, as my parents had left me to stay with her for a while, so there wasn't mom or dad to watch over me. I opened the door, which was extremely stiff, and walked in. It was cold, and there was next to no light. I looked around for a bit, across the dusty workbench, and I turned around. I felt this tremendous pressure on me, and I felt like I heard this voice. The voice was powerful but garbled, like it had trouble speaking. It said either of these 2 things. Get out or get help. I couldn't make out the second word specifically, but the sound and tone of it were clear as day. I know it sounds like fiction, but it happened. It was like there was someone else in there, but I knew for a fact that I was the only one around. It was an old man's voice. It was really rough but powerful. I felt so scared and panicked. I looked around, and I couldn't see anyone. There wasn't anyone else there. It was just me. I ran out of the shed, closed the door, and that was that. A year or 3 later, my grandmother sold the section, the shed was knocked down, and a massive house was built, and that was that. I think about my experience a lot. I'm still extremely skeptical about most ghost stories and encounters. I really don't believe in that stuff, but I really can't explain it. I'm utterly baffled. The closest explanation I can offer is that it was some kind of hallucination. I was a very young teenager. I know our eyes see what we want them to see in the dark. The voice was like a foghorn. It terrified me. I still think somewhere there could be a logical explanation for it, and most likely there probably is, but for right now, it's the closest thing I can point to say that ghosts might actually exist. I explored an abandoned hospital, and now I think something is following me. It all started when we got there, and as soon as you got into the building, you could feel the difference in temperature. I had an uneasy feeling the whole time exploring, like something was there. When we got to one of the windows, there was a fan that was old and sagging down from the ceiling. My girlfriend was watching it while I walked away to look around, and she said as soon as I would walk away, the fan would move, but when I came back to look, it would stop. After that, I tried to get it on video, and a huge gust of wind blew through the building and through the window we were looking in from. My girlfriend also thinks she saw something called an orb in the video. I am not the best with words and how to properly explain my experience, but when I tell you it was real, I couldn't be more certain. It's that kind of thing when you want to believe it isn't real, but so much goes on that isn't explainable. We started at the first floor, but we chickened out because it was too dark for the flashlights we had. We found a staircase that led to the second floor and went on from there. When we got to the second floor, it wasn't as bad. We just kept hearing what we thought were footsteps, but that could be an animal or something. The longer and longer we spent in the building, the more unsettling I felt, but my girlfriend felt fine the whole time. She thought maybe it was because I had a cross around my neck, but I can't be sure of anything because I don't know how this stuff works. There was a lot of spray paint and a lot of what I think are called histograms. The demonic symbol you see in movies and whatnot. From this point on, everything was okay. Until we left and went to a local park in our area. When we got there it was fine until we were sitting on the bench and we suddenly heard a whistle. Mind you, it was 7:30 and pitch black with nobody around. That was scary for her because she said it sounded like the whistle was right next to her ear, but when I heard it, it sounded like it was at least 50 feet away. We left the park after this and started our drive back to my house. We were on the road, and I was talking to my girlfriend, and she wasn't responding. I didn't think much of it because I already knew she was freaked out. Until she started to go off the road, and I asked if she was alright, and she said no and started crying. I asked her to pull over, and I would drive. She later told me that she felt them. I was freaked out because I was astonished to actually experience something like this. We got to my house and sat in the car, and my girlfriend was grabbing my charger that was stuck under the seat, but she was confused about why it wouldn't come up. I reached out to grab it, and it came up like it was never stuck. I might just be overreacting, but I usually don't get scared with this stuff, but now I am. But when she got home, she got incensed to cleanse her room, and I sht you not, the light started flickering. I know she isn't lying about that because I was on FaceTime and saw it myself. Please tell me if I'm overreacting or your thoughts and opinions on my story. Thank you if you made it this far. Our cottage. Our cabin dates back to 1830, or so I've always heard. It's been in the family for generations, and I've spent a lot of time there over the years. I've heard strange stories about the place, none of them outright terrifying, but unsettling enough to make you think twice. Apparently, a few children had died nearby, long before I was born. The area around the cabin is mostly forest, with power lines running through it, but I always heard that the deaths happened about 20 years after the cabin was built, which would have been around the 1850s. I didn't really pay much attention to the stories when I was younger. I was more interested in being outside, exploring, and just having fun. One evening, I was about 11 years old. It had been a long day. I'd been fishing by the lake and riding the ATV through the trails. It was getting late, and the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, creating long shadows across the yard. I was in the kitchen, trying to decide whether I should go out for a quick walk in the woods. There's a small sandbank near the edge of the forest, just a little hill that you can see from the house, and I'd planned to head that way. As I stepped outside, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just the light playing tricks on me, or maybe an animal moving through the trees. However, it turned out to be a figure positioned at the top of the sandbank. I paused, squinting into the growing darkness. I could see the shape of a person, but something about it felt off. They were just standing there, motionless. I could see the outline of old, worn clothes that seemed out of place. I thought maybe it was someone from the village, just a local kid or a neighbor. But then I noticed something that chilled me, the figure's eyes. They were completely black, no light, no pupils, just dark, empty eyes staring right at me. I felt an instant, suffocating dread, but I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or fatigue. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart started racing, my whole body frozen in place. After what felt like an eternity, I snapped out of it and turned on my heel, sprinting back into the cabin without looking back. The following morning, I ventured outside once more, holding on to the hope that it was all a mere illusion caused by the light. I walked over to the sandbank, my heart still racing. There was nothing there. There was no trace of anyone, no footprints, and no explanation for what I had witnessed. The ground was undisturbed, and the place felt normal again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that night. I don't know what it was I saw, but to this day, I can't explain it. Whatever it wasn't something that belonged in the forest. Perhaps my imagination was deceiving me, but the memory of those black eyes continues to haunt me. Haunted airfield. Growing up in rural Hertfordshire. I grew up in the UK near an old World War II airfield. As kids, my friends and I had a great time exploring the old outbuildings and air raid shelters. One day we were on our bicycles and were at the perimeter gate trying to decide whether to spend another day exploring the airfield and maybe chatting to the aircraft mechanics up at the far end who were working in the aircraft hangars or creating an adventure somewhere else, when one of our group pointed up the perimeter track towards an old air raid shelter cum guardhouse and said, "Look, there's a woman watching us. Perhaps she's in trouble, maybe we should go and see if we can help." So we jumped on our bikes and sped as fast as we could to the old air raid shelter. It was only 100 to 150 meters, and we'd covered the distance in less than a minute. When we arrived at the air raid shelter, there was no sign of the woman. We searched around the area and could find no trace of her. Years passed, And we turned from children to adults and went our separate ways, but occasionally we'd meet for a few drinks or a social occasion, and invariably the conversation would come back to that peculiar day. You can imagine the startled look on my friends' faces when I tell them that I'd been doing some research on the history of the airfield and I'd come across an article relating to an incident at that very air raid shelter, where a woman had ended her infant child before ending self. Did we, as kids all those years ago, see the ghost of that woman? If that had been my only experience at that air raid shelter, perhaps I could have dismissed it as a trick of the light, or maybe indeed there was a woman out walking down the perimeter track that day, but you see, I saw her again, maybe 7 or 8 years later. I would have been 15 or 16 at the time. My uncle had bought a house that faced the end of the runway, and the house and garden needed a lot of work, so during the summer holidays I helped him and my aunt with jobs around the house and garden. One day we had worked well into the night before calling it a day. I jumped on my bicycle to cycle home, and because it was late and I was tired, I decided to cycle through the park, which had now been built on part of the old airfield, and join up with the old perimeter track. This was the short way home and would save me several minutes over the normal, well-lit route along the main road. It was a fantastically clear night with a bright moon, and it was about 11 o'clock at night when I picked up the perimeter track and headed towards the air raid shelter. Because I didn't like the vibe or atmosphere around that air raid shelter and always found it creepy, I picked up speed to pass it as fast as I could. I could see the gap in the trees where the air raid shelter was, with the moon illuminating the clearing, and you could obviously see the air raid shelter. I dared not look at the air raid shelter as I passed it, focusing only on the track in front of me and the gate at the end of it. I passed the air raid shelter and breathed a sigh of relief, but something made me look back, and there, standing in the middle of the perimeter track, was the woman we'd seen several years earlier, her white summer dress almost glowing in the moonlight. I think I broke my all-time record for getting home that night. Guided to his grave. My ex-wife thought she was a psychic or had some kind of clairvoyance or paranormal abilities. We would kind of half joke about it, and even now I look back on it cynically and chalk it up to her wanting attention. But there was this one time that I still wonder about. Charlie had never met her great-grandfather. She had heard many stories about him, though. He was a tall, angry man that always wore a three-piece suit and loved to beat his wife and children. He was, by all accounts, a mean, violent alcoholic. He died destitute and was reported to be buried in a particular cemetery in a nearby city. Being a fan of cemeteries, we would visit them frequently. Often to take photographs, or just to explore in memento mori. One afternoon we were exploring a large cemetery across the street from the cemetery where her great-grandfather was supposed to be. She had often talked about trying to find his grave, but no one seemed to know where it was. I believe we had gone looking a few times but came up empty-handed. As we were driving slowly through the other cemetery, across the street from where he was reportedly buried, Charlie, who was looking out the passenger window, suddenly yelled out, "Stop! Stop the car!" I stomped the brake, and she undid her seatbelt, opened the door, and walked hurriedly into an area dense with headstones. I watched her walk in about 20 feet and then stop. She was staring at a headstone. I put the car in park and got out and walked over to join her. There was his grave. He was buried next to a friend or distant relative in the other half of a double plot. Apparently when he died, there was no money to bury him, and there was a vacancy thanks to the friend or relative that had a double plot that they ended up with in the divorce. So that meant that there was basically a free hole in the ground they could stick him in, and the guy who was in the other half didn't mind sharing the eternal resting place since his ex-wife was going to be buried with the postman or whomever. She said that she didn't see the headstone from the car. I believed her about that because she had terrible vision. Uncorrected, her left eye was so bad that she couldn't recognize my face across a restaurant table if she covered her right eye. She hated wearing glasses, so she rarely did if anyone was around. She said that she just had a feeling. I couldn't see the name on his headstone from the road, and my vision was excellent at the time. The nun from the graveyard. We call this one the nun from the graveyard. This is one of the few experiences multiple people had at the same time. So only me and my dad are the only ones in the family who are able to see ghosts, and for some reason we were driving past a graveyard, and I thought it would be a good idea to explore it. For reference, the people in the car were my mom and dad in the front, dad driving, and me and my sister in the back. Mom and I got out and did a loop around the other side of the church. On the right side from the car, I saw a nun crying into her hands by a gravestone that wasn't there before. I just continued walking. Then at the front of the church on the way back to the car, I turned around, and the nun was following us. I walked really fast and called to my mom to hurry, or I would leave without her. After getting in the car, I looked out the window but couldn't see the nun, so I thought it was safe. The car left the church really fast, faster than I had ever known my dad to drive. That night I was telling my dad about what I had seen, and he went pale. He had seen her too, but my mom hadn't. My dad explained that after mom had gotten in the car, the nun got in the car too, and the nun was sitting kind of inside my mom. He drew a picture to explain it, like half nun, half mom, mom staring out the front window, and the nun staring at my dad. She apparently had red eyes. My dad drove off really fast to get her out of the car because of ghost boundaries, and he was terrified. Urban exploration experience. About 2 years ago, I and 5 other friends went to a local abandoned parking garage. We immediately noticed a weird sort of feeling or energy in the air. We also felt uneasy, and one of my friends even started to feel nauseous. After a while we all started to feel better and proceeded to explore. Not long after, we hear a faint bang from the second level. Note that we were the only ones, and we just played it off as something that fell down randomly. One of my friends suddenly yells out in pure terror. He claims to have seen a figure walk across the lot and disappear. Obviously, we dismissed this as nonsense and proceeded to investigate further. But that's when I heard something whisper in my ear. It was soft but clear. "Leave now," it said. After that, I immediately notified the group, and we started to freak out. However, we ignored the whisper and continued. That's when we heard footsteps. Clear as day. We didn't mistake their footsteps for our own or anything else. Following that incident, we became extremely frightened and quickly retreated to our car before heading home. Nothing like that has happened to any of us since that day. Any suggestions on what happened? A house in northern Maine. This telling is about something odd that happened many years after I lived in the house. I'll omit the bulk of the background. I lived in a 1900 farmhouse in northern Maine in Aroostook County along the border with Canada. The house was a small 2-story clapboard-sided farmhouse. The central heat was a giant, handcrafted metal stove. It was large enough to fit a log a foot in diameter and 3 feet long and sat in the middle of the dirt-floored basement. The stove was so airtight that you could throw in several chunks of split hardwood and dog it down tight. Then you crack the air vent just a tiny bit, and the fire would smolder all night, with heat drifting up through the vents and ducts. It was the main heat in the house, although there were 2 additional cast iron wood stoves. I lived there with my father and his girlfriend. My father would spend a lot of time working on the property, clearing brush. He also worked on scraping the peeling paint and applying a fresh new coat. Although he refused to invest money in the house, so many of his repairs were low quality and incomplete. After I moved away, I stayed away for over 15 years. One day my wife and I were staying at a hotel a few hours away and found ourselves with a free day to randomly explore. We ended up driving back to the area of that house and decided to make it our destination. The area hadn't changed much. The area is very sparse with many dense trees and large grassy yards and fields. There are scattered farms throughout the area. We turned off US Highway 1 onto Wilcox Settlement Road. The house was maybe a quarter mile down the road. The sun was low in the late afternoon sky, a bit above the trees. I parked at the end of the driveway, or dooryard, as the locals call it. The house was a wreck, in much worse shape than when my father had owned it. There were a few beat-up cars parked by the house. The yard and porch were cluttered with barrels, scrap wood, and various pieces of old junk. They had removed much of the siding, revealing mylar-backed foam insulation boards pressed between the studs in the exterior wall. There was an old, dented, rusty pickup truck parked closest to the road where we sat idling. With my foot on the brake, my wife and I sat gaping at the creepy old dilapidated house. The yard was overgrown, and the brush had reclaimed most of what my father had laboriously cleared all those years ago. Movement caught my eye in the dimming light. A waving hand. There was a man standing on the other side of the old pickup truck, and he was slowly waving his arm, beckoning us toward him. He was a large, overweight man, late 30s to mid-40s, dressed in a dirty work coat. His mouth was open in a gap-toothed smile, and he stood there, still except for his raised right arm, slowly beckoning us to pull into the driveway. I was frightened. Initially, we didn't notice him and were taken aback by his close proximity. Secondly, the way he stood there watching us, beckoning, reminded me of a scene from a backwoods horror film. The man's smile seemed to me a cunning veneer of harmlessness, belied by a bleary, cold glint of greed or worse. I instinctively floored the accelerator and sped away. I hate that house. It was a horrible place. I felt like it was stained with bleak sadness, fear, and loneliness. Screaming in the forest. I live near a very old forest. In its near history, it was an ironworks in Victorian times and a quarry not too long ago. It can be traced to have Iron Age settlements of humans there too. But the river, trees, ferns, and mosses have reclaimed their home over the years, and some spots are much older than others. There is a Jurassic waterbed in one part, which is elevated and is a flat plateau with surrounding cliffs. It's beautiful, with trees lining the lip of the bowl around the top. To get to this part of the forest, you climb a not too steep slope, and you can explore these woods, which lead on to meadows and amongst the clusters of trees. On a sunny day, there is nothing better than being here. My friend and I made a fire during the summer solstice of 2020, and we had a lovely time watching the sunset, gathering wood, and chatting away. As the sun got closer to the ground, making the sky hold hues of pinks and purples, and the bats were beginning their hunting for the night, we were running low on wood and had collected all the bits small enough on the flat plateau area, so we made our way up to the entrance of this forest part, which was something we had done together and alone for years. We got closer to the first trees and had scoured the small grassy area in front for what we could. The energy just changed, it got heavier. It was quite dark, dusky if anything, and we could see about 3 feet in front of us still and each other. As we were bending over to collect wood, this blood-curdling scream began and came from farther away, too, right in front of us, and we dropped the wood in fear. This rush of energy bounded towards us, screaming like nothing I've ever heard. We both looked right towards the source and could feel it getting more and more intense and louder. As it got to our faces, we couldn't see anything, just hear this painful scream. Me and my friend are very into our birds and nature, and we looked at each other, both white as sheets, and said, "Must be a bird of prey." And both assured each other of that multiple times as we turned around very quickly and left that area. The walk back through the forest and the outskirts was really quite scary. In the dark. I walked the whole length of the first and second halves of the forest alone in the dark, which was interesting and unnerving, but not as scary as that night with my friend. As we moved further away from that area, we both remarked that we had never heard a bird like that, nor had we seen its wings flapping or heard any sound from them. It was merely a scream that originated from the back of the forest, traveling quickly and in a straight line directly towards us before stopping at the edge of the tree line. And the rest of the forest was silent. I've told this story to a friend who is convinced it's a banshee, and I just don't know, but it was ducking terrifying, and I definitely will not be going up there in the dark again. It feels like it could be an owl with the type of scream/screeching, but owls have fat wings and are often not black, so we would have seen it, I'd feel. Abandoned urban exploration takes a turn. 7 years ago, in October of 2016, my friend and I were looking for something to do. Being freshman college students with a proclivity for adventure that bordered on recklessness, we decided to explore some buildings on the abandoned Air Force Base in our area. Now this particular base already had a supernatural reputation, even so much as to be included in those most haunted lists for Illinois, but our intention wasn't ghost hunting, it was simple urban exploration. The building we chose that night was the base hospital, a 3-story brick building with a basement. After making our way inside, we began exploring the first floor, which, as you can imagine, was in utter disrepair, with furniture and debris scattered everywhere. Our mood was light, we were having fun walking around and snapping pictures, and while there was an underlying tension, it was more from the thrill and fear that comes with being somewhere you probably shouldn't be. Having finished the first floor, we decided to head down to the basement next, then make our way to the upper levels. The basement, which was more of a recessed sublevel, resembled the first floor but was in much worse disrepair, so we quickly moved through it. It was when we took the staircase to the second floor that things changed. Immediately the mood shifted. My friend and I exchanged glances and remarked on our strange discomfort. Because we couldn't attribute it to anything specific, we did our best to shake it off and continue our exploration. We continued our walk, capturing the abandoned state of this once active building with our phones. I checked my phone's battery, which I still vividly remember being at 24%, then went back to taking pictures. After a few more minutes of that, my phone suddenly died. I tried turning it back on, no luck. I attributed the issue to a bug or condition, feeling mostly annoyed that I wouldn't be able to continue my documentation. The rest of the time was pretty straightforward. Our time in total was maybe an hour and a half. Several times I tried turning my phone back on, but to no avail. It wasn't until after we'd left the site and were sitting in a drive-through that my friend told me to try turning it on again. I obliged him, and to both our surprise, it immediately came back on. I checked the battery level, 24%. We went back to his apartment, where we began looking back through the pictures we took, sharing cool shots back and forth. Then, I got to the last picture in my roll, the one I'd taken immediately before my phone shut off. Something about it caught my eye, so I examined it closer. I wish I hadn't. At the end of the hallway, you'll note a doorway. The pinprick of light is the flash of my camera reflecting off the windows in the back of the room. If you zoom in and look slightly below and to the right of that flash, you'll see a hazy outline that becomes clearer the more you zoom out, which you will be unable to unsee. I will personally attest that there was no physical object in that doorway. I won't try to tell you what I think it is, because quite frankly I don't know for sure what it is. I want you to form an opinion for yourself. I'm not easily persuaded of the supernatural, but by sharing it here, you can probably guess what I'm leaning towards. While this story may seem dramatic, I swear to you that the events that took place are 100% factual and exactly as they played out. Oh, by the way, that room at the end of the hall? It was an operating room. This is a story about me and two friends on a school night out. My school was having a slumber party. At night, exactly at like 1:30 a.m., I and both of my friends felt like we needed to go and pee. So we went to the washroom, relieved ourselves, and agreed that none of us felt sleepy. So, we decided to explore the entire school. There are 2 buildings on our campus. We entered the building that is located near the cemetery. We thought that we wouldn't see anything. As soon as we entered the building, we started getting bad vibes. We felt compelled to turn around and head back to the building where the other students were gathered. But we were an adventurous trio. Defying the odds, we decided to explore the building. What could possibly happen? Will we hear footsteps? Will we see some large objects being thrown in front of us? Nope. None of these were present. We started hearing someone talking. We thought that there must be another group exploring, but no. Suddenly, the temperature of the place suddenly fell. Like 0 degrees Celsius, even though it was summer. Then, we heard a loud female scream. So loud that we thought that the students in the other building might hear it. We even started feeling that whatever screamed was coming running towards us. We turned our backs and ran as fast as we could. Upon reaching the other building, a teacher who was with all of us asked us why we came running so fast out of the next building. We told him everything that happened, but he denied hearing any scream. We thought that it might have been an imagination. The next day, one of my friends who accompanied me into the building got a couple of scars on his stomach and chest. He even fell insanely ill. I felt like sharing this experience here with you guys. Thank you. Unexplained encounter at an abandoned hospital. Catching up with an old friend, this story was brought up that happened when we were younger about this very eerie experience I had a little under 9 years ago in the spring of 2016 while in high school, and I decided to share it here. For a little backstory, this took place in Edmonton, Alberta, in Canada. A city near where I grew up. This would have taken place in the spring of 2016. There was an abandoned hospital called the Charles Campbell Hospital that my friends and I would explore quite often. Now this hospital has a history of being haunted and has many creepy ghost stories from many different people. It's even been featured in some ghost TV show, can't remember the name of the show. Anyway, a little history on the hospital. The Charles Campbell Provincial General Hospital operated in Edmonton between 1946 and 1996. There are reports of physical, mental hurt, accounts of forced sterilization and shock therapy, and experiments with TB, tuberculosis, vaccines on patients, mainly First Nation Native Americans, without their consent. Patients that were there recall mass unmarked graves in the field behind the hospital filled with patients that died. In 2021, they began using ground penetration radar to search for these graves, not sure on the conclusion of this investigation or if anything was found. Anyway, now to my story. I'd been at the hospital multiple times. You'd have to sneak inside as the place was in the process of being torn down at the time, and there was constantly security patrolling the perimeter. Each time I had been there, my group of friends and I had weird experiences, like odd sounds, not unusual for a big, abandoned building, also probably housing homeless people, and sometimes an odd melody that faintly played, almost like elevator music. Multiple people have similar experiences with an odd melody playing. But this one time in particular was more chilling than any time before, and just thinking about it creeps me out even after all these years. In late spring 2016, my 3 friends and I went to explore the hospital late at night. The hospital had a large perimeter fence that you had to hop and walk through the field behind the hospital to get to. We wanted to go inside, but the usual small access window had been rebarred up again by the city to prevent access. Distraught, we decided to leave as we couldn't get in. We began making our way back through the field behind the hospital, where apparently there is a large unmarked Native American burial grave, back to the fence to leave. As we were walking, 4 of us side by side, we all stopped dead in our tracks as we all heard an elderly, frail-sounding male voice say, mind you, this voice sounded like it was directly behind us and in our ears, as if he was no less than a foot away from us. You know you shouldn't be here. My 3 friends all took off running after hearing this voice, but I stood there completely still as it just froze me and chilled me to the bone. As I stood there for maybe 2 to 3 seconds after my friends ran off, the same old frail man's voice, but this time in a much deeper, serious tone, said, "If I were you, I'd run too." This made me bolt and take off running for the fence, and I actually blew by my friends and got there before they did. I was that scared. The only logical explanation I can chalk it up to is that it was a homeless person lying in the field, but this theory doesn't sit right with me because 1. It wasn't pitch black in the field. The hospital is located in the middle of a neighborhood, so there were homes not too far away with front lights on and street lights lighting up the streets around the perimeter of the field. It was dark, but you could make out where you were walking. The odds of the 4 of us walking side by side and not seeing him or stepping on him seem unlikely. And 2. The voice sounded like he was directly over our shoulders, behind us, especially the second time when it was just myself who heard his reply. I could swear it sounded like he was no less than 1 foot from me, almost speaking directly in my ear. We got the hell out of there and made it back to my car. We all panicked, but they panicked more after I told them what I heard after they ran. I can't logically make sense of it other than that it was a paranormal encounter. With the history of this place and the location we were walking in supposedly being a mass grave, it all makes too much chilling sense. What do you think? A simple explanation of a homeless guy or something more creepy like a ghost or spirit wanting us to leave? In 2006, when I was 16, I went on vacation with my aunt, her husband at the time, and my 2 cousins, who were 10 and 14. We took a road trip to Arizona from Sacramento, California, and stopped at all the neat stuff along the way. We were on the way home and decided to stop at this cool old ranch that had been turned into a store off the side of Route 66 in the middle of the desert. The buildings were split by an outdoor covered walkway. One side was a cute little boutique store, and the other was an antique store. I started at the boutique because I knew how long I could take looking at antiques and didn't want to run out of time. I took maybe 15 minutes in the boutique store, bought 7 miniature house shoes for $1 each, and then headed over to the antique store. The second I walked through the door, I knew something wasn't right. It almost felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. The owners greeted me. He was middle-aged, extremely tall, like 6 feet 6 inches, with taut, tan skin, a long, hooked nose, and a greasy, straight, black, chin-length bob haircut, parted severely down the middle. His eyes were so dark, they were almost black, and they were totally lifeless. He didn't smile when he welcomed me in. His wife was a tiny little thing, with extremely long, flowy, dark hair and wide eyes. She looked absolutely terrified and squeaked a greeting at me. I thought this was really weird, but I would just look around and not engage with them. Chances were I wasn't going to buy anything anyway. Besides the owners, it was only my family and one other lady in the store. The other lady left shortly after we got there. We each ended up going our separate ways in the store and doing our own thing. There was a hallway running the length of one side of the store. It had tables on either side of it. Side tables, coffee tables, console tables, entryway tables, you name it. I started to walk down the hallway and then looked down to the end of it and watched the hallway elongate before my eyes. It just kept stretching. It seemed like it was only 30 or so feet long at first, but then suddenly it looked like it was becoming 100 feet long as I watched. I decided to walk down it anyway. It was only about 30 feet long. I exited the hallway at the other end and decided that I didn't need to look at those tables again. I wandered on to look at a room that was set up to look like a Victorian bedroom. Scrolling, iron headboard and footboard, canopy over the bed, lace lampshades, and a little pair of black, Victorian boots by the bed. They had almost certainly belonged to a child, and I did not feel good about them. They gave me a feeling of extreme unease. So moving right along away from those creepy little boots, I walked into the next room. As I began to walk into the room, an unseen force stopped me. I looked into the room, and it was lined, floor to ceiling, on 3 of the 4 walls with porcelain dolls. The room was filled with shelves upon shelves of porcelain dolls. There had to be hundreds of little glass eyes staring at me. I tried to walk into the room, and I was unable to move past the doorway. I think porcelain dolls are a bit unnerving, but I don't have a fear of dolls, and I tend to like weird and creepy stuff, so I wasn't sure exactly what was holding me back. It's as if I was being prevented from going into the room. That settled it for me. It was time for me to leave. I looked up to the front counter, and my cousin was talking to the owner. That made me uncomfortable, so I went to see what they were talking about. The owner was trying to sell him a literal Egyptian Book of the Dead. To a 14-year-old. WTF? I grabbed his arm and told him it was time to go. Right then my other cousin and my aunt showed up and said that they were ready to leave. We said goodbye to the shop owners on our way out. He said goodbye to us in the most monotone, dead voice I've ever heard. She said nothing, just blinked at us with her wide eyes. When we got back to the car, we all instantly started recounting our experiences in the antique store. We all had overlapping stories. The 10-year-old cousin had gotten a bad feeling in the elongating hallway but didn't see the same thing I saw. He also had something else happen to him, but I can't remember what now. My aunt had the same experience with the little boots by the bed in the doll room. The owner stopped her at the door, preventing her from entering. The 14-year-old cousin said that he went into the doll room, and it was the worst feeling he'd ever had in his life. He went to leave the store and was stopped by the owner, who then tried to sell him the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I showed up a little while later and dragged him off, and then we all left. The only one who didn't experience anything weird was my aunt's husband, who said that we were all overreacting. My aunt and cousins all agreed that if we had tried to go back and find that antique store, it probably would have never existed at all. There's some weird stuff in the desert. I was driving from KS to Western Oz one time and pulled off to get some gas at some point in Oz, or it might have been Utah, honestly. It all looked the same. I had bypassed some earlier gas stations right off the highway because I was being indecisive about when to stop, and finally I just got off because I didn't know when the next gas station would come along, and I had to drive about a mile or two away from the highway and make a turn onto another road to get to this little gas station. I wanted to get snacks/use the restroom first, so I parked in the lot, not at the pumps, and I saw this field across the road with all these cool desert trees that I'd never seen before, so I made a mental note to get closer and take some pictures before I left. As I was moving cross-country with all my belongings in my car, I felt a bit paranoid about leaving it at stops, so I made sure to hide the valuable items in the front before double-checking that I had my keys and locking the door. The inside of the station gave me a strange vibe, and when I went back outside and moved my car to the pumps, that feeling persisted. It felt like I had entered some tiny little wormhole town where outsiders were most definitely not welcome. I had the impression that everyone was closely observing me, as if a single, sinister universal consciousness was whispering to me, "We're watching you." It was eerie and ominous. After filling up my gas tank, I climbed into my car, secured the doors, and quickly left the area. The only pictures I got of the trees were from afar in the parking lot of the gas station when I first arrived. I never went over there to take pics. For some reason I didn't feel like I or my belongings were safe. It wasn't until I was on the highway that I felt secure again. I never saw that type of tree again. I noped the duck out of Arizona pretty quickly, too, but that was just because of the conservatives. Many years ago, when I was a 12-year-old kid, now 19, my grandmother and I would often visit open houses for fun to kill time. Because we were closer to central Pennsylvania, the homes in that area tended to be much older than average. One dilapidated wooden house stood out from the rest, as brick houses that had stood for a century were sold for their land. In the middle of nowhere. The only way to and from this forested residence was a single rocky path. When first arriving, there were a few people casually checking out the house's surroundings. The old brick building had an added wooden deck and seemingly updated windows, very obviously installed by the previous owner due to its shabby look. However, what stuck out most to me were the various bones littered across the yard. My memory is a little hazy when it comes to these details, but my guess at the time was chicken bones. These must have been some well-fed chickens, though, for how big these bones were. We eventually made it inside the house and did some exploring. Overall, it was a pretty normal experience, as my grandmother and I checked out an old piano and furniture within the rooms. It was when we got to the attic that things became off. We were the only ones in the attic, a dark, moldy place with boxes. I immediately felt like I was being watched. I never knew how heavy the feeling of eyes could be, even if there were none. I pressed on, however, not wanting to worry my grandmother by my paranoia over nothing, I thought. As I went forward, there was a window, closed, with just a massive pile of dead ladybugs on the windowsill. There were no flies, spiders, or stink bugs present, only thousands of dead ladybugs. To this day, I still can't figure out why. I couldn't find anything on sickness/mold that would target ladybugs or traps that would cause that. The final part was when my grandmother made it to the back of the attic, undeterred by these events, and searched through a box hidden behind some clothes racks. A photo of a seemingly Amish family of 8 was found. As she picked it up for us to get a closer look, we felt some sort of overwhelming presence. It's hard for me to describe, as I've never had problems with my body, still being young, but it can only be described as a massive panic attack. This one photo could affect me to the point of having close to a heart attack at such a young age, making me feel the flight or fight response as if a bear were in the same room. It was when my grandmother looked back at me with the same fear in her eyes that I knew it wasn't just paranoia. We ran out of there like a bolt of lightning and never looked back. While there wasn't something with a figure I could physically see or hear, my grandmother being there, feeling what I felt, is what stopped my second guesses. It's made me wonder through my childhood about the existence of souls, that we aren't just some wires and meat but have an existence beyond where our feet take us. It's satisfying to know we mean more, if that makes sense, but also crippling. The newfound stress of perfectly making the most out of life and the fear of possibly being tethered to a space on Earth are fueled by memories of what could have been rather than what can I do that life provides. Perhaps I'm too engrossed in the past and or thinking too negatively while jumping to conclusions. I often wish I had followed the warnings and gone back downstairs to be forever in ignorance of the future, but humans do what they do best and let curiosity guide the way. The awesome part about listening to this is that you make your own judgment about my words. I could be lying, dehydrated at the time, or maybe mentally unwell, and you can live life through your own beliefs. Though if there's one thing you can take from this account, it's to not take warnings lightly and respect others' properties. Have a neat day. One of my wildest experiences. So to give you a quick context. 5 years ago, during our sophomore year of high school, my 3 friends and I explored an abandoned house that had the creepiest energy. It contained a Ouija board in a room marked by numerous scratch marks, which led us to forever refer to it as the creepy haunted abandoned house. Some more context, I had a dream on this road that I will be referencing where I was driving, and on this road were these 2 ghostly looking figures with decayed faces that were absolutely terrifying. Okay, so now for the story. I was hanging out at my friend's house with my 2 other friends, I'll call them Harold and Pete. We played the new horror game The Devil Inside Me, so we were already kind of creeped out. We left our buddies, and Harold left about 5 minutes before I did. As I'm driving, I get to the road that I had a dream on. Obviously, at this point, I'm not thinking anything of it. However, Harold called me, somewhat agitated, to share that he had driven past the abandoned house, which has always been on his route home, and noticed that the main hall light was on, something that had never occurred before. He was telling me how freaky it was that this was the first time it's ever happened, especially after playing this horror game. Now, immediately after he told me this, I felt a huge vibe change. It turned into this super dark vibe, and immediately I knew something was going to happen. I thought back on that dream I had and thought for sure something was going to happen. As I neared this location in my dream, a raccoon unexpectedly appeared, prompting me to give it a severe beating. My first ever time hitting an animal was right after Harold called me about that house. That whole vibe felt like it was all planned. It was pretty crazy that all of this happened at once within just a couple of minutes. I do believe he called me with that awful juju, and this all happened because of that. I feel like I didn't explain this the best I could, but I thought I would share. I heard my voice coming from the woods one day, and now I think some creature is taunting me. I don't know if this has something to do with paranormality, but I will share this here regardless. So a little bit of context, I live in a residential kind of area with a big forest part, and in my route when walking my dog, I go through that forest part. I usually walk my dog around 5 to 6 p.m. during summertime and around 3 to 4 p.m. during wintertime due to the sun going down earlier. So a couple of days back, Monday, I forgot to walk the dog, and naturally I had to walk him after I came back from the gym. Mind that I leave for the gym around 6 p.m., and when I usually come back home, it's pretty late, around 7 to 8 p.m., and during wintertime, it's pretty dark then. So that meant I had to walk my dog during the night. So I arrived home and put on my dog's leash and left. Thereafter, the dog stopped a few times to sniff some plants, etc. After my dog was done with sniffing, we started going further onto the route into the forest part, which at the time was pitch black. After some time I noticed that my dog was stuck like glue beside my leg while going into the forest. I got a little shaken up when I saw him doing that, because usually he's very playful and excited to go for walks. At the moment I thought that my dog was scared of the dark because I never take him out on walks during the nighttime. Oh boy, was I wrong, so we arrived in the forest part and started walking through it. At the time, nothing weird or out of the ordinary happened. We went a little further into the woods past a few abandoned houses while walking. Meanwhile, the dog stopped to sniff some grass, and I went a little bit further on. Then I noticed my dog was left behind, and so I called out to him, "Coco, let's go, we need to go." Then he came to me. After I turned my back, I heard the worst sound that you could ever hear while in a forest next to abandoned houses. At that moment, when I turned my back, I heard my own voice saying the same words, in the same tone, in the same way I said them a couple of seconds ago. At that moment I picked up my dog subconsciously and made a run for it, going past yet another abandoned house. Mind that the forest part is a big loop. Now I know it wasn't my own echo because I heard it already, And what I heard was a couple of seconds later after I said it, like 5 to 7 seconds, and that voice had no echo, at least how I heard it. Then I arrived home all shaken up. I let the dog loose and sat on the couch. After what felt like centuries but has been 20 minutes, my mother arrives home, so I instinctively go to her to tell her what I witnessed. Then she sat me down and told me a story of what she saw one day while also walking the dog. She told me that one day while walking Coco, she was also in the forest, where I witnessed that. She further told me that she saw a weird dog. She said that the dog was completely out of place and had no reason to be at the place where he was and looked weird, and she told me that she didn't mean he looked weird like there was something wrong with him. She told me he just looked weird. Further, I connect her experience and the dog with the uncanny valley because what she told me was literally just the uncanny valley, and if you don't know what the uncanny valley is, think of it as everything is normal, but at the same time everything is wrong. So now, after I heard what she said, I connected my incident with a skinwalker because I saw another skinwalker story online. I don't know if it was 100% true, but I think it was, where a dude heard a skinwalker mimic his voice and call for his dog. Now after all of that, I shower and go to bed, and then on Tuesday, nothing out of the ordinary happened, but I hear around 11:30 p.m. weird sounds coming from outside my window. I live in a house, not an apartment, and my room is on the ground floor. When I woke up a bit better, I heard the sound better. It was footsteps. At that moment I faked sleeping and, out of fear, fell asleep. After all of that, I woke up Wednesday morning and told my mother what I heard last night, Tuesday. My mother told me that we would incense the house. I felt relieved, but my mother went to work, and when she came back around 7 p.m., she forgot all about the incense stuff. Around 6:40 p.m. I go on a walk with my dog because I yet again forgot to walk him. Before I left, I called my mother to see how she was doing, then I got focused on the call and let my dog control the route. He memorized it and knows where to go. Then my dog wasn't scared like last time, and because I didn't pay attention, I didn't notice where he was dragging me. When I finally noticed where I was, it was already too late. My dog brought me to the forest loop, but not deep, like just at the entrance. At the entrance, about 30 meters in, there is a light post that usually functions properly. But at that moment it surprisingly didn't, so it was me alone in the darkness with my dog and my iPhone flashlight, which is weak AF. Then my dog stops to eat some grass, and I don't allow him because one time a grass fiber got stuck in his throat and he kept coughing for like 3 days. Then I call for my dog, Coco. No, let's go, you're not allowed. After 2 to 3 seconds I hear, Coco, let's go. I didn't say exactly what I meant to say, but it was in line with my initial statement. I was on a call with my mother at the time, thankfully, and then I started running with my dog past the abandoned house where my mom saw the weird dog. Then, after like 5 minutes of running, I arrived home, and after 10 minutes, my mother came home, and I discussed everything with her, nothing exceptional to be said. After all of that, I went to sleep. Yesterday, nothing unusual happened during the day until I heard footsteps at 11:30 p.m. That's right, 11:30, exactly how late I heard the footsteps on Tuesday. After finishing my shower, I went to my room and saw my cat looking out the window at nothing. It couldn't have been a bird or a person because we have a closed yard, and directly in front of my window is a big metal wall. So I find it really weird for my cat to do that because normally my cat doesn't look out windows. Then I closed the window and went to sleep. Today, Friday, I discussed everything with my mother, and finally I entered the house. I was just getting ready for bed and decided to spend, like, half an hour writing this. If you read this far, keep in mind all of what I said here is true, and I swear on my soul that it is. Explored a haunted state school. I and a friend spent a few weeks browsing the internet looking for some creepy places to go exploring that were somewhat close by to us. Most were already demolished / being renovated or still businesses running, and some were graveyards, which we checked out and were mostly uneventful. We then found a creepy description of a place that talked about it being home to evil spirits and deemed unsafe because of them, and on top of that, it was still standing and closed a few years ago. In total we have taken around 6 trips to this place because it has around 40 buildings, not including cottages / dorms, that are all decent sized. On our first trip, we had a group of 3. We have a map of the place so we know the general locations of places. This was a trip to see if the place was fully closed and still standing. We parked on the school grounds for this trip and checked out 3 buildings. The first building we checked out was a music hall, which was uneventful. We then moved on to a chapel building. This was the cleanest building we found. It had a weird feeling about it, but I didn't notice anything besides that. All the doors were unlocked besides one that we assumed led outside. On the way out, both my friends said they heard a bang from a viewing type platform near the back of the chapel. The last building we visited on the first trip was a nursery/school building. For some reason, random lights in this place were on. We assume it was because the school shut down only a few years ago. So we started down the hall on the first floor. Up until this point, the only light on was the entrance light. All the classrooms were off. This one random classroom had a light on. My friend flipped the switch off and then back on, and within a second of it being turned back on, we all heard a loud bang from directly above us on the second floor. We then proceeded into the basement, where nothing eventful happened. The second trip there was with 3 people again, but we took a different friend who had a nice quality video camera since the first no longer wanted to go. The first thing we did was check out the chapel again. Nothing really happened here except the new person we took opened the door that we seemingly locked without any effort. After that, we explored the main building we intended to visit. The place had fences all around since it was set for demo. As we strategized our next course of action, the path we had just taken seemed to be under constant surveillance. We decided not to try and get into this building for now since everything just seemed off. We decided to explore the storage house next door to it, which we thought was a hospital because we got lost on the map. We were entering this building from the bottom half, and it was locked tight at the main door. We decided to try a creepy looking basement door that was somewhat rotted and shut tight with plants and mud. We entered the basement and saw a metal door at the other end, which was only around 20 feet away. My friend pulled at the door, but it seemed stuck. As he turned around to say it was stuck, it opened on its own. It looked like a maintenance tunnel, so we didn't enter. This is where the camera was a plus to have. A day after we left, the person with the camera, who is my friend's friend, told us to come to his house because he caught something on it. The video he shows us captures the moment he first walked into the basement, where no one is talking. However, we hear a woman's voice saying "Get out of here." He responds to the voice heard in the video, which seemed to be audible only to him at that moment. In the video it looks like there is a woman leaning on a table facing away from us, but we are not able to tell. More events happened at the place, but this was the biggest. My only weird/paranormal experience was in Coos Bay, Oregon, in a 100-year-old abandoned hospital. So back in high school, I and around 4 of my friends went for a drive to Coos Bay, Oregon, to visit this 100-year-old hospital called the Wesley Methodist Hospital because, well, we were teens and heard it was haunted, so naturally we went there around midnight and found a way through the fence surrounding the 4-story building and finally found a way in. We walked around and explored for a few hours, looking at all the old stuff lying around and all the graffiti, and of course tried to spook ourselves out. I remember at one point I turned my flashlight off and left the group, going up to a floor where none of my friends were. I lasted less than a few minutes before I said, "Duck that," and went back to my buddies. After searching the entire building, we went to the middle floor, sat in a hallway, smoked a little, and played some Tiny Tim to set the mood. We thought it was a mental asylum, and we figured playing music like that would get a reaction from anything that may or may not be there. Well, nothing really happened, but we decided everyone should turn off their lights and just sit for a minute, and before getting up and leaving, one of us decided we should turn the flash on our cameras and take pictures down each side of the hall that we were in. That's where these pics come from. We had taken a lot of pics that night, and there was nothing, but the next day when looking through all the pics, this one stood out. You can clearly see a person peeking around the corner. Hell, if you zoom in, it's detailed enough to tell it's a woman, and before those pics were taken, it was completely pitch black. If you didn't have a light, you couldn't see 5 feet in front of your face, and every single one of my friends was right next to us, so it absolutely couldn't be one of them. Now, all that being said, it was a weird ducking experience, and I felt weird and uneasy the entire time I was there, but that's the vibe we set for ourselves. I couldn't tell you this experience made me believe in the paranormal because I honestly don't. I still think it's more logical to say there could have been someone there watching us in the dark rather than saying it was a ghost, but either way, it was a crazy experience, and I wanted to share it with you guys. I would appreciate hearing your thoughts on this. Real investigation. Finding ghosts. Date of investigation, July, 2022. Every paranormal investigator has had one of those evenings during an investigation. You're trying to get a reading on your EMF or attempting to find cold or hot spots with the thermal monitor. However, you find absolutely nothing. But you carry on and explore further because you know the history of the location, and you're determined to find something, anything, to prove that ghosts exist, to verify to the skeptics that there is life after death. I find indoor locations to be the most interesting. They're quiet and enclosed, and you can really see everything within your peripheral vision. What makes it better is that you hear the activity in the other rooms that you can't visually see, making the atmosphere feel incredibly eerie, something that gives paranormal investigators their rush to want more. What a fantastic experience our location was. It was filled with incredibly prepared, determined, and ready investigators, bringing along the necessary equipment that would surely grab the spirit's attention. One of the most pivotal moments in the night was the use of the REM pod. We had all transferred to the second floor, and we had use of 2-bedroom-style rooms. We decided to set up equipment in both rooms. Room 1 had the REM pod located in the center of the room, along with one chair next to the window. We decided to place the pod in this location because investigators had past encounters in this room, feeling the darkness that was located in the corner, emitting the feeling of being watched. Upon entering that room for the first time, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. A paranormal investigator's mind must be prepared to feel all sorts of strange and challenging emotions within a possible haunted area. I suppose it didn't help that the building was physically deteriorating, emulating an already spooky feeling in the room. The second room felt less threatening than the first room, so we placed a foldable mirror on top of the fireplace. This, combined with the dim lighting, allowed spirits to travel between the two realms more easily. I think this gave some of the group a different sense in this room, but at least the doorway to alternate realms wasn't near the raging REM pod. Once everything was in place, we attempted the inverted seance, a highly used practice, to try and feel the presence of anything paranormal either in front of or around us. What made this a credible execution was having all of the investigators facing out whilst standing in a circle holding hands. You have that knowledge of complete stillness from the group. Additionally, it eliminates the possibility of potentially breathing on one another and accidentally thinking it is a spirit passing you. Everything was in place, and we were ready to start contacting the spirit realm. I could tell some of us were feeling a little uneasy, but we had to push forward. Upon performing the inverted seance, the majority of the investigators felt a sudden increase in temperature, whereby they were sweating and complaining that it was scorching. I, on the other hand, didn't feel this phenomenon. Could I be the one affected at this point, rather than everyone else in the room? It was something I definitely considered. Furthermore, the entire group, including myself, felt extreme dizziness to the point where we all felt like passing out. I'm not sure any of us had felt anything quite as powerful that had the power to affect 8 different people all at once. During this session, the REM pod, which was in the other room, consistently reacted to an unknown presence in the area. At the beginning of the investigation, we all scanned the area using an EMF reader to see if there was any intrusion of magnetic fields throughout the entire property, for which we received absolutely no readings. Not only that, but the property is known to have very little power running through it. At this point in the investigation, I felt as though the result could have been one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that we have ever witnessed. We needed someone to go to that room alone with a camera and record it, as it has been detecting some kind of magnetic field for over 10 minutes. Realizing that the REM pod was reacting so vigorously to our seance in the other room, we all decided to move on to part 2 of the experiment, which was to attempt a human pendulum test in which all investigators except one stand in a circle, whilst the last group member stands in the middle. The members creating the circle will ask the spirits, who will respond through the middle member, to sway the central member in a direction that would determine the word yes and again for the word no. I had never taken part in the human pendulum in the past, as I had always gone to explore different areas of past investigations, so this was new to me, and I was excited to see how this worked. The group started the experiment. We found this experiment particularly interesting. Not only was the member in the center of the circle responding to questions, but the REM pod created a unique pattern that pulsed only after we received answers, which was fascinating for me as a first-time participant. We managed to get a clip of the REM pod reacting to nothing in the room. However, we were unable to collect enough evidence to show the activity that was being performed in the other room. Hopefully, in the future, I will be much more prepared to show you that the paranormal does indeed exist. This property will definitely be one to return to. Thanks for listening. All 5 of these experiences happened at the same location. Comish Hall, Albion, Idaho. Background: in my local area, we have a series of haunted mansions. They were built out of an old teacher's school when people were moving across the country to live out west. The rest of the campus has been restored to be homes and condos, I believe. The 4 that have not been touched outside of some updated wiring and reinforced spots are left for the public during October to walk through. 3 of the buildings are set up as a scare attraction, while one of them is left empty for self-guided exploration. I've had weird experiences in this building's vicinity. First encounter: the first time I had ever gone, it was me, my parents, a friend with her brother, and their parents. She was a really big scaredy cat towards anything horror, but through the attraction houses she had been oddly calm and excited to go through everything. However, when we got to this building, We hadn't even walked up the steps before she had started to bawl her eyes out and scream like something was attacking her. Our moms and her brother had opted to stay outside and take care of her while our dads and I went and explored. We had no other strange things happen in the building, but when we asked her about the meltdown in the car on our way home, she didn't remember ever doing such a thing and was genuinely really mad at us for going without her into the building. A few months later, we abruptly stopped communicating and maintained no contact. Second encounter. This happened a few years later in the same area with a different friend. We did manage to go into the building, and all of the photos we took from this time have acted weird. In all of these photos, there is a weird film grain that is over each one, like the quality of my camera has been disintegrated, which is weird because I took the photos on my phone. In one set of photos taken from 3 different phones of my father, there is this weird fleshy blob in it. The way it looked would suggest a hand moving, but my dad's hands were in his pocket and around the guide, who was making sure we got out of the basement safely. The guide's hands were covered by sleeves. Also, a few months later this friend also left my life, and we no longer speak to each other. Third encounter, the longest one. I don't know what to make of this because it still haunts me. This time I had multiple experiences, not that I witnessed but that I was a part of. Both this friend and I are very big into spiritual things and the use of tarot crystals and things of that nature. We had black tourmaline with us for this trip. Now I am fully aware of how stories can be manipulated because the mind plays tricks on people, but I have never seen an amethyst act like a magnet. In one of our first encounters, I had something trying to force my glasses off of my face. It was pushing them through my head from the left. My friend was experiencing the same thing, and that was after a large crowd of people had walked by the room we were in. This energy felt violent, and it felt like the crowd made it mad. We had at one point labeled this entity the toddler, as the pain from our glasses felt like a tantrum. Later on in a different room, there was this strong masculine presence that felt like it just wanted to exist with us. I do 100% believe it tried to attach itself to my friend at one point and failed or only partially succeeded and grabbed his hand. Later on in this building, we both felt this insanely strong pull to find a woman who was on the second floor. Unfortunately for us, the stairs at this time were blocked off for fear of the roof collapsing. We tried to find a room below this feeling, and we couldn't do so. Eventually, we ran into a cast member whose job it is to guide people out of the building, and we ended up speaking with him about what we had experienced and what questions we asked, etc. He mentioned that at one point there was a chair in the old meat locker of this dormitory that had been bent to hell. However, there was no clear explanation for why the chair suddenly gave out. So we went to check it out and brought the cast member with us. My friend then points out that there is a very faint, separate masculine energy that is following this cast member, and he ends up communicating with the cast member using the amethyst pendulum he had brought. The cast member leaves, and suddenly the pendulum refuses to move. It cannot be bothered to answer any questions. So he hands it to me, and the second it is in my hands, we both feel the woman we had been looking for. However, her energy is still on the second floor, like she's stuck, but she can now communicate because of where we are at. At about halfway through this encounter, we had gathered a small crowd, and the only request we had was that there was no light on me or my friend because we didn't want to risk weird shadows. So we had one light facing away from us, and the area I sat in was dark. I had wrapped my arm up in the broken chair so that my movements wouldn't affect the pendulum. The whole time, if anyone asked her a question, she refused to answer unless it was my voice speaking to her, like the pendulum went scarily still, like something was refusing to let my hand shake or let the crystal swing. The one time she responded to a person that wasn't me was when someone asked to take a photo of the room, and I and like 10 other people watched the pendulum hold at the established number. The pendulum's tip pointed to no, the chain was diagonal, and my arm didn't move. Eventually, I got a phone call from my mother saying we needed to leave, and I watched this pendulum start to violently swing towards the no. Like my presence was needed, and the energy my friend and I felt was a wave of anger toward my mother because I was being taken away. I never once felt as if I was in danger. Up until that point I felt safe, like I was in an environment I had spent my life in. Eventually, I convinced her to let me go and that I'd come back, and when we were leaving, the person who asked to take a photo informed me that she had seen the shadow of a woman standing behind where I sat, leaning over my form like she was looking at what I was doing. As we were leaving this town to drive home, I felt an overwhelming urge to return, as if she wanted me to come back and continue our conversation. I know she's still there and didn't follow me because the need died when I got back to my hometown. Well, it turns out that after a few months again, this friend and I no longer talk. Fourth encounter, I took my ex-roommate, and in every single room that I had previously had an experience in, they got so violently ill that they couldn't even go near the room on the second floor that I thought my ghostly shadow resided in or the basement meat locker I had spoken to her in. When my ex-roommate left, I felt a strange sense of calm, like danger had been removed from my area. And I couldn't find her presence or anyone else's presence. Turns out this ex-roommate, for reasons I can't talk about, decided to leave my life in a very violent and traumatic way and continues to attempt to make my life hell. Last encounter, this past October. I took my roommate and a friend of mine there. The grounds were so calm and safe that other than a few very gentle pulls to specific places, nothing happened. There were no feelings of needing to find something or someone. I didn't have any crystals on me, I didn't have my pendulum, it was just me. Throughout that experience, I felt safe enough to unmask and be my actual self, and I watched these two people be okay with that. Granted, my roommate is moving out, but that's because our apartment has no internet. On our drive home, both of these people fell asleep in the car while I was driving home, something that I know only happens if you feel safe enough to do it. One of my other friends has had a similar thing happen. A person they took, they're no longer friends with after meeting a strong feminine entity. My thoughts on all of these experiences are that, for some reason, something or someone in that house was trying to protect me, and when the threat was gone, the need for me to sense them was no longer present. I'd love other people's thoughts or if you've experienced something similar. Villagers vanished due to the greed for immortality and prosperity. The mystery of the vanishing village. It was a warm summer evening when Sarah and her husband, John, decided to take a road trip to the quaint little village of Willow Creek. They had heard stories of the village's charm and picturesque surroundings and were eager to explore the area for themselves. As they drove through the winding roads, they couldn't help but admire the lush greenery and blooming flowers that lined the streets. The village itself was a sight to behold, with its old stone buildings, cobblestone streets, and friendly locals going about their daily business. Sarah and John checked into a soft bed and breakfast, where they were greeted warmly by the owner, Mrs. Jenkins. She was a kind elderly woman who immediately took a liking to the couple and amused them with stories of the village's past. As the sun began to set, Sarah and John decided to take a casual walk through the village, taking in the views and sounds of this charming place. They strolled through the narrow streets, past quaint shops and cafes, and chatted with some villagers. But as they walked further into the heart of the village, they noticed something strange. The streets seemed eerily quiet, with no sign of life anywhere. The shops were all closed, and there wasn't a single person in sight. Puzzled, Sarah and John continued on their way, eventually reaching the village square. There, they were met with an even more breathtaking scene. The entire village seemed to have vanished into thin air. The buildings that had once stood tall and proud were now destroyed, with overgrown weeds and vines creeping up the walls. The streets were empty, with no sign of the villagers or their belongings anywhere. Sarah and John were completely confused. They had just walked through the village, but now it seemed to have never existed. It was a real-life mystery that neither of them could explain. As they stood in the silent street, attempting to comprehend the events that had transpired, a gentle whisper drifted through the wind. It was a voice, soft and melodic, calling out to them from the shadows. Curious, Sarah and John followed the voice, which led them to a hidden lane behind a decaying building. There, they found a mysterious figure wrapped in darkness, their features hidden by a shadowy disguise. The figure spoke in a very soft tone, revealing the truth behind the vanishing village. Long ago, the villagers had signed a contract with a powerful sorcerer, trading their lives for immortality and prosperity. But as the years passed, the sorcerer grew greedy and demanded more sacrifices, eventually driving the villagers to fall into fear. Now, the village existed in the trap between the lands of the living and the dead. Its residents were cursed to wander the streets for immortality. Sarah and John were horrified by the eye-opening incident, but they knew they had to find a way to break the curse and free the trapped souls. With the help of the mysterious figure, they began on a risky journey through the shadows, facing terrifying creatures and dark forces along the way. Finally, after enduring a long and terrifying journey, Sarah and John reached the heart of the village, where they confronted the sorcerer himself. With courage and determination, they challenged him to a battle of wills, decisions, using the power of their love and kindness to overcome his dark magic. Ultimately, they broke the curse and restored the village to its previous splendor. The buildings rose from the rubble, the streets filled with life once more, and the villagers returned to their homes, grateful to be free at last. As Sarah and John bid farewell to the village of Willow Creek, they knew they would never forget the mysterious events that had unfolded before them. They were thankful for the odd, surreal experience that had brought them closer together. And as they drove off into the sunset, they knew that some mysteries were best left unsolved, hidden in the shadows of time and memory. This is a true story. The ghost that haunted us at Slug Bug Ranch. My friend and I decided to go on an adventure to Slug Bug Ranch, an abandoned motel made shortly after Cadillac Ranch in my hometown of Amarillo. Slug Bug Ranch had been rotting on the Route 66 highway for a long time. Could it be haunted by something tragic that still hasn't been discovered? Are ghosts traveling through the highway? Or am I just personally haunted with an active entity attached to me? My friend and I had made the decision to explore abandoned or haunted buildings, and she spontaneously discovered this location, as if it had been calling to us. It was only an hour and a half drive, so we thought, why not? When you arrive, there's a giant motel sign, a motel at the back, a line of slug bugs, and 3 buildings on the side. We decided not to explore the motel because of a previous experience we had at an abandoned hospital getting chased by a homeless man collecting metal, a story for another time. Once we got there, we started walking through the slug bugs, admiring the spray paint on them. All 3 of the buildings were falling apart and spray painted as well. The eerie atmosphere of this place was palpable. As we're walking through, we start in the first building you can see behind the buggies, just walking around cautiously in case there were any hobos hiding in the night. As we stroll around the first building, we begin to hear faint noises. Despite the absence of anyone else, we attribute these sounds to the building settling. We both start getting eerie vibes as we take pictures and videos. As we talked about how crazy it would be to see a ghost, we started feeling a little spooked while making our way to the second building. Suddenly, a bird flew out of the ceiling and scared us half to death. Taking it as a sign, I began taunting the spirits that might inhabit this abandoned building by saying things like, "Spirits, ghosts, demons, whoever you are, just show us you're here, and you mess with me at home and take my things, so just show me you're real, and you can do the same thing here." My friend was getting scared, so I made sure to let them know to leave her alone, as I was saying they would mess with me somehow to let me know they were here. My friend hands me her cigarettes to hold on to because she doesn't have any pockets. #girl problems. After we go through and explore the first building, we make our way to the third building, but my friend and I go separate ways, her climbing over stuff and me just walking around because I didn't want to fall and hurt myself. We start exploring the last building, which just looked to be a garage with spray paint all over and a little room that is like a roof, and we could climb on top like a little chill area and a little crawl space close to the wall. We chill up there, spray paint talk, and we decide it's about time to go. While we were up there, I know her cigarettes were in my pocket because I was holding onto my jacket pocket so nothing would fall out. However, when I emerged from our chill spot and she requested her cigarettes, they were no longer there. Now it is almost 3 a.m. at this point, and I'm majorly baffled because we both knew I had her cigarettes in the chill space. We start looking around for them, but we just can't find them. While we're looking, my friend's fully charged phone just turned off and won't turn on even though that's never been a problem before. We search the place, and we can't find the cigarettes. We take a break in the car to reset and warm up because it was pretty chilly outside. We go back and search again, and we still don't find anything. She was ready to give up and leave at this point, but I assured her that I wouldn't give up. I even told her it was about to be witch hour, so we should stay and look anyway. What if something crazy happens? The third attempt proved successful. We return to search, and she is examining the area that I avoided because I was afraid of falling. When she discovers the cigarettes, her phone automatically switches back on. She looks down at her phone, and the time is 3:33. It's not only the spooky coincidence of the time, but also the fact that she found her cigarettes in an area I avoided because I was afraid of falling. Was something demonic messing with the cigarettes I had because I said she was off limits? Has something been following me for a long time, drawing energy from this place? Or were the spirits listening to me, trying to show me the afterlife is real? I'm a 17-year-old high school kid. I live in a small town in Texas, and this is my first time sharing on here, and I've been thinking about it a lot recently. I've never gotten a professional standpoint on this, but I've told a handful of friends and even some of my family, but I wanted to see if I could get some opinions from people who maybe know a lot more about this topic. I've always been fascinated and passionate about exploring haunted hotels/motels or exploring abandoned buildings, and I've had some crazy experiences when I was younger. Here are 2 of the most bizarre that I can remember from the best of my younger years. Part 1. So back in about 2012, I was about 6 years old. We lived in a house in Abilene, Texas. So it turns out, also, I learned all this house info years later, the house was placed on an old cemetery, and it was haunted. Well, on this exact date that I remember, it was May 5, 2012, at 9:20 p.m. I went to sleep, and I started dreaming. The dream was my siblings in our bunk bed. Our house was designed with a short hallway leading to our rooms, and my room was located at the very back. The front of the room faced directly across the hallway to my parents' room. Down the end before my bedroom on the right in the hallway, there's a bathroom and another bedroom before that bathroom. There was another room on the left before the master bedroom and a closet before it also. Well, it was dark all the way down to the end of the hallway. And all the lights that were on in the whole house were the living room lights, everywhere else was black, and you could barely see into the rooms. I remember I jumped out of bed, and all my siblings raced to the end of the hall. I remember I was the last one out of the room. There are 3 things I saw at once. 1. I looked into my parents' room across the hallway, and I saw a shadowy figure standing in the room in front of a window next to the bed in the master bedroom. 2. I saw my siblings at the end of the hallway all of a sudden. 3. I felt a gravity pin me against the wall. I tried to move and scream, but I couldn't. I was pinned against the wall, and I couldn't talk. Think of it almost like sleep paralysis. I looked to the left into our room, and we had a short dresser, maybe like 2.5 feet tall, and on it we had a box television, like the big-ass old ones. I was able to hear everything. The TV started playing this very disturbing but extremely clear-sounding orchestra sound, and on the TV, in a somewhat big green font, it said these exact words: "This was not an escape from your judgment." I looked left into my parents' room, and I saw the shadow again. Instead, I observed the shadow slowly creeping to the end of their room and then moving across the wall, staring at me as I was pinned against it. I remember the moment I saw the shadow. I looked down the hall, and everyone was gone. The light in the living room shut off, and it was dead silent. I swear I could hear my own blood rushing through my body in my dream. It was so silent not a single thing was making noise. And in that exact moment, I heard a whisper. I can't remake what it fully said. It was something like, "I'm never going to underscore," and I spun my head to the area to see the shadow staring at me still. And the moment I looked, it flew into my face, and the last image was a cloudy cloak and huge white eyes like pearls going into my vision. I felt my body rush cold like a breeze of air in the fall. Once it got to a distance where I saw nothing but black, I woke up. I was sweaty, and it was disturbing. I didn't know what it meant because my consciousness was so young at the time, but I knew what nightmares were, so I played it off like a normal scary dream. Then exactly 4 years later on May 5, 2016, at 9:20 p.m., I, for some reason, remembered everything. Then I started piecing everything together. The moment I realized what it was, I felt my heart in my throat and my blood went cold. It was something so much more than a simple nightmare. It's no coincidence it was so clear and my entire family was in this dream at the same time. I realized that that wasn't a nightmare. It seemed more like something was trying to communicate with me through a dream, or it was something taking over in my sleep. And fast forward almost 10 years later, and I have no answers to what that dream meant. Part 2. To give even a bit of a backstory of what went on in that house, I have seen some things fully conscious too. I was in the living room with my family. We were watching Paranormal Activity, and the TV was set up in an entertainment center about 2 feet tall, with a window behind it. The TV was positioned far enough to the left that a small opening of about 6 to 9 inches wide was available for opening the curtain. Now even to add on this day it was raining and thunder and lightning was striking every second, like a World War II war zone. I remember all of a sudden looking to the right slightly out the window because there was a tiny sliver of the window visible just looking outside and lightning struck down. As soon as it lit up the sky, I saw a silhouette of a man leaning in through the curtains, as if it were watching all of us. As soon as I saw the silhouette, my young and innocent mind recognized that it wasn't human, causing my spine to tingle and making me start to sweat. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to freak anyone out, so I decided not to say anything, and it stuck in my mind for a few weeks after that. After a few months, I forgot about it. Fast forward 9 years later, I was with my oldest brother. He is the oldest one out of 4, including myself, and we were talking about this house one day while I was in his room hanging out with him one summer night. Now, keep in mind I never told my parents, my siblings, or anyone else about this experience that I witnessed. I decided to tell him. When I finished, I watched his face drain of all color, and he started to freak out, saying he saw the same thing and decided to never tell anybody. We ran to our parents, and we told them. When I tell you their facial expressions went to the most scared I have ever seen them ever in their lives, I am not exaggerating. I don't mean to make him sound like a Greek god or anything, but my dad isn't the type to really be intimidated or scared. But when he's scared of something, I know he is scared. Now, what they saw wasn't what I and my brother saw. They said, after the movie was said and done, we went to our room to go mess around in there. Now they were in the living room together, and they were going to the theater room to watch a movie by themselves. When they got up and walked to the theater, they saw a boy about 4.5 feet tall with a red shirt and blue shorts. They stared at it for a few moments. As they went to see who it was, it jumped in our room. Our parents raced into the room and asked if we were okay. We were fine, and I actually remember them running in, and I was super confused but never got an actual answer as to why they did until that day. To anyone who may be curious, we left that house over a decade ago. But in the few houses we've moved to, nothing ever happened to this extent. There were instances of strange noises, random sounds outside the windows at night, and even objects being found open after you had sworn you closed them just moments before leaving. Usually I play it off easily because the homes we lived in were a bit older and I figured maybe it's just an old home being an old home, you know? I have never, nor has my family, seen a priest or used a Ouija board to find out who these phenomena were that messed with us, and we strictly refuse to find one or the other. That is all I have to share. If there is anyone who knows what this could mean or what I should do, please let me know. Thank you if you read to the end. I have a few other stories about some abandoned buildings I've explored with friends in my middle school days, so if you want a story about some of them, please let me know. I don't really believe in ghosts, but this experience has me second guessing. So I really love exploring abandoned buildings. Especially factories and warehouses, so one day last summer, I asked two of my friends if they wanted to go explore this abandoned factory that I had heard about from a friend. The pictures he showed me really intrigued me and piqued my interest. Surprisingly, they agreed to go with me. They had never gone to any abandoned place and were very hesitant when I asked. So anyways, we get there and park behind the building, and there is a slightly open door. They're hesitant to go in, so I walk in first. Immediately I get a little creeped out. I get this feeling that I have never had before while I'm in an abandoned building. I feel like I'm not supposed to be there. I know I'm not because trespassing, I know, but it wasn't like that. Even though I'm really creeped out, I keep walking. There's a set of stairs that we walk up to get to the second floor. On the second floor, I feel fine. The feeling goes away. We choose to return to the first floor after thoroughly exploring the second floor. Now the first floor is absolutely massive. There's machinery, elevator shafts, and loading docks for trucks. We decide to walk down one of the massive hallways when I get a feeling that I should not go down there. So, not wanting to look like a puss, I just suggest that we should do that last. As soon as we turn around to go away from it, we hear what sounded like a woman singing. We stop walking and listen again. There it is again. It sounded like someone was singing a note and holding it. It was a hot, windless day, so I know it wasn't the wind. As soon as we heard it the second time, panic overflowed all three of us, and we ran out of there as fast as we could. We got back in the car and drove away as fast as possible. I'm pretty skeptical, and I want to believe that it was just a local resident messing with three curious teenagers, but I really don't know. For anyone wondering, this happened in Brownsville, Pennsylvania, at the old brewery. Unfortunately, I do not have pictures inside of the building anymore because I lost them when I got a new phone. The building is pretty cool, and I suggest looking into the history. Creepy urban exploring story. When I was a teen, I got really into urban exploring. At the time, the city I live in was considered a major city by the fact that it was one of the only recognizable place names in the entire state, despite it only having about 250,000 residents until people realized how nice the area is. Now it's over 1 million. Despite the small population size, the city is about 30 miles in any direction from downtown, and, at least at the time, there were a ridiculous number of vacant properties, both business and residential. This meant I had tons of places to explore. The thing is, all my friends were too scared to go with me more than once, and I was all of 16 and too chicken to go alone. I only did that once, and a homeless man was asleep under a pile of blankets I stepped on, and I think that gave both of us a heart attack, so I always made sure I at least had backup in case the next person whose bed I stepped on wasn't so chill. After months and months of not doing some harmless B&E on abandoned properties, I mentioned to my mother how I wish I had braver friends because I'd noticed an abandoned farm on the route my school bus took home and wanted to check it out. My mom is, and especially at the time, was, an addict, bouncing around between substances like I do with whatever candy sounds best based on my mood. But she wasn't dangerous about it and was mostly fun until it was 5 p.m. on a Wednesday and she was out of her stuff and damn near breaking your door in to get money for more. But it wasn't bad most of the time. The point is, she was no stranger to breaking, or bending, the law and had been a single parent of 3 for most of my life and all of my younger brothers' lives, so she also was not one to flinch at a little confrontation or conflict. I waffled a bit, not sure if it was lame to bring your mom urban exploring or not. But I'd have been taking her truck there anyway, so I figured I'd let her come with me, and if it was fun, she could be my new urban exploring buddy. We arrived at the overgrown driveway leading to this place around 7 p.m., which was dusk that year. We weren't planning on staying long, and I didn't know if there was even anything to see because the trees were so dense. The drive meandered through woods and over a creek for the better part of a mile before it opened into a field. In the center, there was a barn. I was ecstatic. Finally. There was something exciting to discover. We parked the truck a little ways away, and I handed my mom a spare pocket knife, just in case. She looked at it like it might bite her but ultimately shoved it in the front pocket of her jeans and took the lead. I followed behind her before catching up. We strolled in the field, discussing how nice it would be to have space like that instead of a cramped apartment. Eventually, I asked if she wanted to look in the barn, and she said yes, so we headed that way. The barn looked old and was starting to sink on one side. Very faintly, I could make out the name of the old farm painted on the side, along with Horse Ranch. My mom was excited, saying maybe we could find some cool loot. Horses, after all, are costly to properly care for, so maybe some rich person left behind a bunch of gear. The entrance was two large wooden doors that had to have been about 10 feet high and 6 feet wide each. I was both suspicious and relieved that I wouldn't have to handle the propped open door. The doors looked heavy. As we round that open door, my mom stops, gasps, and practically clotheslines me to make me stop walking. On a stick propping the door open is a neon mascot head. That thing scared the Jesus out of me, she declared, as if one could possibly mistake a bright yellow and blue canine head for an assailant. She moved closer and tried picking it up by one dingy ear. "What the hell is this, anyway?" she asked me. I'm in my 30s today, and thanks to the internet, I was able to instantly recognize it. "It looks like the head to a fursuit, like what furries wear," I told her. She made a face that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. "A what? Furry? Do they wear these things, then?" And, before I could answer, she yelled, "Oh my God, is it a physical thing, and I'm touching it with my bare hands?" I laughed a little and said, "Yeah, it is for some people, but the appeal seems to be that no one knows who you are behind the mask, kind of like Batman. However, I recently came across information online about leaving just the head in a specific location. It means that there's been a furry party in this barn." She looked revolted and mimed gagging. I, obviously, was just bullshitting. I had just as little idea why it had been left like that as my mom did. I tend to say whatever I think will be funniest in a given situation, and I knew her reaction to hearing that little misinformation would be worth the lie. "Well, let's hope none of them are in here now," she says before turning to the open door and yelling, "Hey! If you're getting it on in there right now, I have my 16-year-old daughter with me, so knock that shit off." I said it might be unwise to be so loud, but she said we'd been there for half an hour, so anyone with ears would know. Good point, I guess. We shuffled past the dirty neon wolf or bear or whatever head and into the barn. It smelled of dust and rot, but in the way a woodpile does, not in the way a nasty home might. Soft evening light filtered in through windows along the rafters. Stables lined the bottom part of the barn, and ladders on either side allowed access to the loft, on which hay sat, decomposing. To our immediate left, there was a small room that resembled an office. Old log books and office supplies littered the floor, but there was ultimately nothing of interest or value inside. As we walked across to the other side, my mother gasped again. "Do you see that?" she asked, sounding worried. I looked around for a person, my knife already out, and I witnessed her running forward. "Saddles. Oh, coming out here was worth it. I bet we can sell these on Craigslist and make a good bit of money. Here, help me get them to the truck." There were 4 total, heavy as hell, about 5 feet up the wall on hangers. I guess that's why no one else had taken them yet. After fighting the brackets they were placed on, we carried the first 2 to the truck, tossed them in the bed, and went back for the next 2. As my mom was working on getting a 3rd saddle free, I swear I heard something behind us. It was almost dark by then, and I was starting to regret not bringing a headlamp. Trying to peer through the remaining light, I turned around and saw movement. I froze, and when I saw nothing else moving, I hissed behind me to my mom, "Hey! I think someone is in here with us." She instantly stopped. The barn was dead silent. "You're hearing things," she said. Or, rather, she mostly said, as a dark figure shifted in one of the stalls as she was saying it, cutting her off. She grabbed me and pulled me behind her so quickly I didn't realize what was happening. "I see you. Go away. Leave us alone. We're leaving in a moment, okay?" She really wanted those saddles, enough that she was willing to try convincing whoever, or whatever, this was to leave us be until she had them. The person in the stall kind of laughed. Their voice was deep. I still couldn't make out anything other than the person must have been wearing all black with how engulfed in shadow they were and that they didn't look much taller than I am. "No, I don't think so," they said, taking another step closer. My mom was practically snarling at this person by then, gripping the knife I'd lent her like she'd been getting in knife fights her whole life. "Stay back," she said, her voice surprisingly calm and low. "My kid's here with me, okay? We'll leave now. You can have the damn saddles. If you hurt her, though, I'll fight you until there's nothing left of me." The shadowy figure laughed again. They were walking towards us again. Slowly. Menacingly. It was evidently intended to intimidate. "If you're threatening me, miss, we might have an issue." We continued to navigate our path. I was unsure of what to do, but I knew we had to leave. I drove us to the barn, but I had only been driving for a few months, so I knew I wouldn't be able to peel out and escape. As my mom was trying to rationalize with this figure, now only about 100 feet away, I was working to get the truck's keys out of my pocket to hand to her, hoping she'd take the hint and run like hell out of there with me. The figure noticed. "What are you doing, kid?" they asked me. Better not be trying something stupid. I didn't know how to react, so I just stared, and the person went back to talking to my mother while casually shuffling forward. I was deaf to the world with how intensely I was working to get the keys out without raising much suspicion, so I'm not quite sure what they discussed after that. Finally, I fished the keys from my pocket. I was still behind my mom, and I did my best to slide them into her left hand and hope she recognized the feeling of them, as the knife was still raised in her right. Her fist closed around them, and I bolted. A millisecond after I began to move, she exploded forward, toward the person in this barn with us, and pushed them on their ass in the dirt. As the person was struggling to their feet, she yelled at me, "Run!" And run I did, as fast as I ever have. I ran as fast as I hoped I would ever have too. I got to the passenger side door about the same time she reached the driver's side door. I had left the truck unlocked, so we both got in without having to fumble with the fob to unlock the doors. My mom slammed the key into the ignition and shifted into drive, and we did a big U-turn through the field and got the hell out. I turned around to look through the rear window, scared the person had somehow ended up in the bed or hanging onto the hitch or something, only to see them futilely chasing us as we disappeared back into the woods. The last thing I saw before we got to the tree line was a man, white, with dark hair and short, maybe in his 30s, raising a gun and aiming. I heard the shot, my mom started yelling expletives, and we burst back onto the road like a bat out of hell. There was luckily no traffic on that road at the time. We got home, still panting and feeling like we were going to have heart attacks, and I told her what little I was able to see of the guy as she was checking her truck to see if there was any damage from us zooming out or the gunshot. No damage, except to our limbic systems. She never did contact police, both because we'd been trespassing and because the substance abuse always had her paranoid that cops would take us away. It's been almost 15 years, and we still don't talk much about it. I never told my brothers about it, and the most we said was when we were shot at while trespassing. I think it goes without saying, but I have not been urban exploring since then, and I have no inclination to pick the hobby back up anytime soon. Those saddles, though? We ended up selling them both for $300 apiece in 2007 money. You win some and you lose some, I suppose. I'm just happy we both made it out of there without so much as a scratch. I live in the far north of Scotland. This place almost feels cursed. The following is a true personal experience of mine. Previously, I shared this story online and faced accusations of it being fictional. However, these events did in fact happen, regardless of if anything supernatural was/wasn't at play. Previous readers have already rationalized the following events, so I'd advise you to read this story with a high level of skepticism. For the past 2.5 years now, I have been living in the north of the Scottish Highlands, and when I say north, I mean as far north as you can possibly go. I live in a region called Caithness, in the small coastal town of Thurso, which is actually the northernmost town on the British mainland. I had always wanted to live in the Scottish Highlands, which seemed a far cry from my gloomy hometown in Yorkshire, England, and when my dad and his partner told me they bought an old house up here, I jumped at the opportunity. From what they told me, Caithness sounded like the perfect destination. There were seals and otters in the town's river, dolphins and orcas in the sea, and at certain times of the year, you could see the northern lights in the night sky. But despite my initial excitement of finally getting to live in the Scottish Highlands, full of beautiful mountains, amazing wildlife, and vibrant culture, I would soon learn the region I had just moved to was far from the idyllic destination I had dreamed of. So many tourists flood here each summer, but when you actually choose to live here in a harsh and freezing coastal climate, this place feels more like a purgatory. More than that, this place actually feels cursed. This probably just sounds like superstition on my part, but what almost convinces me of this belief, more so than anything else here, is that disturbing things have washed up on shore, each one supposedly worse than the last, and they all have to do with death. The first thing I discovered in this area occurred a couple of months after I moved to Caithness. In my spare time, I took to exploring the coastline around the Thurso area. It was on one of these days that I started to explore what was east of Thurso. On the right-hand side of the mouth of the river, there's an old ruin of a castle, but pass that leads to a cliff trail around the eastern coastline. I started exploring this trail with my dog, Maisie, on a very windy, rainy day. We trekked down the cliff trail and onto the bedrock by the sea, making our way around the curve of a cliff base. We then found something. Littered all over the bedrock floor were what seemed like dozens of dead seabirds. They were everywhere. It was as though they had just fallen out of the sky and washed ashore. I just assumed they either crashed into the rocks or were swept into the sea due to the stormy weather. Feeling like the sight was almost a warning, I decided to make my way back home rather than risk being blown off the cliff trail. It wasn't until a day or so after, when I went back there to explore further down the coast, that a woman with her young daughter stopped me. Shouting across the other side of the road through the heavy rain, the woman told me she had just come from that direction, but that there was a warning sign for dog walkers, warning them the area was infested with dead seabirds that had died from bird flu. She said the warning had told dog walkers to keep their dogs on a leash at all times, as bird flu was contagious to them. The news instantly concerned me, as the day before, my dog Maisie had gotten close to the dead seabirds to sniff them. But there was something else. Something about meeting this woman had struck me as weird. Although she was just a normal woman with her young daughter, they were walking a completely identical dog to Maisie, a small black and white border collie. Maybe that's why the woman was so adamant to warn me, because in my dog, she saw her own, heading in the direction of danger. But why this detail was so weird to me was because it almost felt like an omen of some kind. She was leading with her dog, identical to mine, away from the contagious dead birds, as though I should have been doing the same. It almost felt as though it wasn't just the woman who was warning me, but something else, something disguised as a coincidence. Curious as to what this warning sign was, I thanked the woman for letting me know before continuing with Maisie towards the trail. We reached the entrance of the castle ruins, and on the entrance gate, I saw the sign she had warned me about. The sign was bright yellow and outlined with contagion symbols. If the woman's warning wasn't enough to make me turn around, this sign definitely was, and so I head back into town, all the while worrying that my dog might now be contagious. Thankfully, Maisie would be absolutely fine. Although I would later learn that bird flu was common to the region, and so dead seabirds weren't anything new, what I would stumble upon a year later, washed up on the town's beach, would definitely be far more sinister. In the summer of the following year, like most days, I walked with Maisie along the town's beach, which stretched from one end of Thurso Bay to the other. I never really liked this beach, because it was always covered in stacks of seaweed, which not only stunk of sulfur but also attracted swarms of flies and midges. Even if they weren't on you, you couldn't help but feel like you were being bitten all over your body. The one thing I did love about this beach was that on a clear enough day, you could see in the distance one of the islands of Orkney. On cloudy or foggy days, the island seems to vanish, leaving only the ocean and a false horizon. On one particular summer's day, I was walking with Maisie along this beach. I had let her off her lead, as she loved exploring and finding new smells from the ocean. She was rummaging through the stacks of seaweed when suddenly, Maisie found something. I went to see what it was, and I realized it was something I'd never seen before. What we found, lying on top of a layer of seaweed, was an animal skeleton. I wasn't sure what animal it belonged to exactly, but it was either a sheep or a goat. There were many farms in Caithness and across the sea in Orkney. My best guess was that an animal on one of Orkney's coastal farms must have fallen off a ledge or cliff, and its remains eventually washed up here. Although I was initially taken aback by this skeleton, grinning up at me with its molar-like teeth, something else about this animal quickly caught my eye. The upper body was indeed skeletal remains, completely picked white clean. But the lower body was all still there. It still had its hooves and all its wet fur. The fur was dark gray, and as far as I could see, all the meat underneath was still intact. Although disturbed by this carcass, I was also very confused. What baffled me was the complete removal of the animal's upper body, while the lower part remained untouched. What was weirder, the lower body hadn't even decomposed yet. It still looked fresh. I can still recollect the image of this dead animal in my mind's eye. At the time, one of the first impressions I had of it was that it seemed almost satanic. It reminded me of the image of Baphomet, a goat's head on a man's body. What made me think this was not only the dark, goat-like legs but also the position the carcass was in. Although the carcass belonged to a goat or sheep, the way the skeleton was positioned almost made it appear hominid. The skeleton was laid on its back, with an arm and a leg on each side of its body. However, what I also have to mention about this incident is that, Like the dead seabirds and the warnings of the concerned woman, this skeleton also felt like an omen. A bad omen. I thought it might have been at the time, and to tell you the truth, it was. Not long after finding this skeleton washed up on the town's beach, my personal life suddenly takes a very dark and somewhat tragic downward spiral. I wish I could explain what happened, as it would only prove how ominous this skeleton would be, but it's too personal. While I've still lived in this godforsaken place, I have come across one more thing that has washed ashore, and although I can't say whether it was more or less disturbing than the Baphomet-like skeleton I had found, it was definitely bone-chilling. About 6 months later, during the Christmas season, I was still recovering from a personal event that had occurred, one that was almost foreshadowed by the Baphomet skeleton. It was also around this time that I'd just gotten out of a long-distance relationship and was only now finding closure from it. Feeling as though I had finally gotten over it, I decided I wanted to go on a long hike by myself along the cliff trail east of Thurso. And so, the day after Christmas, Boxing Day, I got my backpack together, packed a lunch for myself, and headed out at 6 a.m. I spent the entire day hiking along the trail, and by the evening, I had traveled so far that I came across what I initially believed to be a ghost town. What I found was an abandoned port settlement, which had the creepiest looking dispersion of old stone houses, as well as what looked like the ruins of an ancient round tower. As it turned out, this was actually the Castletown Heritage Center, a tourist spot. It seemed I had walked so far around the rugged terrain that I was now 10 miles outside of Thurso. On the other side of this settlement were the distant cliffs of Dunnet Bay, which, compared to the cliffs I had already trekked along, were far grander. Although I could feel my legs finally begin to give way, and already anticipating a long journey back along the trail, I decided that I was going to cross the bay and reach the cliffs, and then make my way back home. Reflecting on what I would find there, I realized that this was the point in my journey where I should have stopped. By the time I was making my way around the bay, it had become very dark. I had already walked past more than half of the bay, but the cliffs didn't feel any closer. It was at this point when I decided I really needed to turn around, as at night, walking back along the cliff trail was going to be dangerous, and for the parts of the trail that led down to the base of the cliffs, I really couldn't afford for the tide to cut off my route. I made my way back through the abandoned settlement of the Heritage Center, and at night, this settlement definitely felt more like a ghost town. Shining my phone flashlight in the windows of the old stone houses, I was expecting to see a face or something peer out at me. What surprisingly made these houses scarier at night were a handful of old fishing boats that had been left outside them. The wood they were made from looked very old, and the paint had mostly been weathered off. But what was more concerning was that in this abandoned ghost town of a settlement, I wasn't alone. A van had pulled up, with 3 or 4 young men getting out. I wasn't sure what they were doing exactly, but they were burning things in a trash can. I didn't know what they were burning, but as I made my way out of the abandoned settlement, I noticed that at least one of the men by the van was watching me every time I looked back. The abandoned settlement. The creepy men burning things by their van. That wasn't even the creepiest thing I came across on that hike. The creepiest thing I found actually came as soon as I decided to head back home, before I was even back at the Heritage Center. As I finally made my way back, I attempted to retrace my own footprints along the beach. It was so dark by now that I needed to use my phone flashlight to find them. As I wandered through the darkness, guided only by the dim brightness of my flashlight, I came across something. Ahead of me, I could see a dark silhouette of something in the sand. It was too far away for my flashlight to reach, but it seemed to me that it was just a big rock, so I wasn't too concerned. However, I wasn't entirely convinced either. The closer I get to it, the more I think it could possibly be something else. Now that I was directly above it, the silhouette no longer resembled a rock as I had previously assumed. If anything, it looked more like a very big fish, almost like a tuna. I didn't even realize fish could get that big in and around these waters. Still unsure whether this was just a rock or a dead fish of sorts, but too afraid to shine my light on it, I decided I was going to touch it with my foot. My first thought was that I was going to feel hard rock beneath me, only to realize the darkness had played a trick on me. I lift up my foot and press it on the dark silhouette, but what I felt wasn't hard rock. It was squishy. My first reaction was a little bit of shock, because if the object wasn't a rock like I originally thought, then it was something else, and had probably once been alive. Almost afraid to shine my light on whatever this was, I finally work up the courage to do it. Hoping this really is just a very big fish, I reluctantly shine my light on the dark, squidgy thing. But what the light reveals is something else. It was a seal. A dead seal pup. Seal carcasses do occasionally wash up in this region, and it wasn't even the first time I saw one. But as I studied this dead seal with my flashlight, feeling my own skin crawl as I did it, I suddenly noticed something alarming. This seal pup had a chunk of flesh bitten out of it. For all I knew, this poor seal pup could have been hit by a boat, and that's what caused the wound. But the wound was round and basically a perfect bite shape. Depending on the time of year, there are orcas around these waters, which obviously hunt seals, but this bite mark was no bigger than what a fully grown seal could make. Did another seal do this? I know other animals will sometimes eat their young, but I never heard of seals doing this. But what was even worse than the idea that this pup was potentially ended by its species was that this pup, this poor little seal pup, was missing its skull. The pup had lost its head. Its skull. The skin was all still there, but it was empty, lying flat down against the sand. Just when I think it can't get any worse than this, I leave the seal to continue making my way back, when I come across another dark silhouette in the sand ahead. I go towards it, and what I find is another dead seal pup. But once more, this one also had an identical wound, a fatal bite mark. And just like the other seal pup, its skull was missing. I could accept that they were killed by a boat or, more likely, another animal, but how did both seals have the same wounds in the same place and both skulls missing? I didn't understand it. These seals hadn't been ripped apart, they only had one bite mark each. Would the seal, or seals, that ended them really remove their skulls? I didn't know. I still don't, but what I do know is that both of these carcasses were identical. Completely identical, which was strange. They had clearly died the same way. I more than likely knew how they died. But what happened to their skulls? In fact, it's not uncommon to find headless seal carcasses. If they tumble in the surf long enough, the head can detach before washing ashore. The only other answer I could find was scavengers. Sometimes other animals will scavenge the body and remove the head. What other animal that was, I wasn't sure, but at least now, I had more than one explanation as to why these seal pups were missing their skulls. Even if I didn't know which answer that was. Although I had reasoned out the cause of these missing skulls, it still struck me as strange how similar these seal pups were in their demise. Maybe one of them could lose their skulls, but could they really both? I suppose so. Unlike the other things I found washed ashore, these dead seals thankfully didn't feel like much of an omen. This was just a common occurrence in the region. However, after spending most of my life in Yorkshire, England, where nothing ever happens, moving to what felt like the edge of the world and discovering mutilated remains of animals I had only ever seen in zoos has definitely left a lasting impression on me. Over the course of the past 2.5 years, I've come to believe that this region bears a curse. Not only because of what I found washed ashore, after all, dead things wash up here all the time. Several factors contribute to my feeling that this place bears a curse. Despite the natural beauty all around, this place does somewhat feel like a purgatory. This depressing location draws despondent individuals from various parts of the UK. Many of the locals leave this place, migrating far down south to places like Glasgow. On the contrary, it seems a fair number of people, like me, have come from afar to live here, mostly retired English couples, who, for some reason, choose this place above all others to live comfortably before the day they die. Perhaps, like me, they thought this place would be idyllic, only to find out they were wrong. For the rest of the population, they're either junkies or convicted criminals, relocated here from all around the country. If anything, you could even say that Caithness is the UK's Alaska, where people come to get far away from their past lives or even themselves but, instead, amongst the natural beauty, are harassed by a cold, dark, depressing climate. Perhaps this place doesn't bear a curse. Maybe it really is just a remote area in the far north of Scotland that has, for UK standards, a very unforgiving climate. Regardless, I won't be here for much longer. Maybe the ghosts that followed me here will follow wherever I may end up next. If you decide to visit here, it's advisable to limit your visit to the summer months. However, if you have your own personal demons of any kind, please do not move here.